Opening statement, please.
Howell Township Planning Board Special Meeting, May 5th, 2022. I hereby declare this meeting of the Howell Township Planning Board to be open, adequate notice having been given pursuant to the New Jersey Open Public Meeting Act in the following manner. First, on April 21st, 2022, a copy of said notice was mailed to the Asbury Park Press and the Star Ledger. Second, on April 21st, 2022, a copy of said notice was hand delivered to the clerk of the Township of Howell. Third, on April 21st, 2022, said notice was posted in the office of the Planning Board and on the bulletin board in the Howell Township Municipal Building, 4567 Route 9, Howell Township, New Jersey. Members of the public will have a chance to ask questions and comment once the chairman opens the hearing up to members of the public. If you wish to ask questions or comment, you will need to use the raise your hand feature, and we will bring you into the meeting one at a time. You will need to have audio and video capability. You will be sworn in and required to give your name and address. For anyone calling in, you can press *9 to raise or lower your hand and *6 to mute or unmute yourself. This meeting is being videotaped for possible future broadcast on Howell Township TV 77. Thank you.
Thank you. Roll call, please.
Mr. Bavai was excused. Mr. Cristiano,
Here.
Mr. Dorado, I have not heard from. Mr. Greenfield,
Here.
Mr. Husser may be late. Mr. Nicastro,
Here.
Mr. Seaman,
Here.
Councilman John Bonovich, have not heard from him. Mr. Spanville,
Here.
Ms. Talente,
Here.
and Chairman Tannenhouse.
Here.
You have a quorum.
Thank you. Can everybody please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance and a moment of silence for all of our first responders and our troops both serving here and abroad.
Pledge allegiance
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. So this is for the master plan hearing. We don't have to go through the usual correspondence and stuff. Eileen?
But we do have correspondence. We have to deal with the two ordinances from last week.
Okay. Okay, I stand corrected.
Thank you.
Please, Eileen, move forward, continue forward. I don't have it in my agenda on screen, so which one do we want to talk about first?
Ordinance 02211, it's an ordinance amending Article 10, Section 188-84.4, Moderate and Low Income Housing Zone 14, otherwise known as ML 14 of the revised general ordinances of the Township of Howell.
Mr. Chair, if I could just make a recommendation,
Yes, please.
since the master plan may be different at the end of the night than it is right now, that we just hold off on the ordinance review until we finish the master plan hearing. And then we're
Okay.
dealing with the most up-to-date master plan and substantial consistency.
That probably makes sense. Thank you. Okay, under council's suggestion, we'll get going on to the master plan hearing. Amendment to the land use plan element.
Well, it's also the circulation element, both elements.
I didn't know if we wanted to hit each one individually or hit them both at the same time.
We'll do them both at the same time because there is an interrelationship. And when we open it to the public, there may be questions that overlap both. So I think it's more
Okay.
efficient if Jen addresses both, and then we don't have to worry about, how focused we are on comments and questions.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate that input.
So
Right.
just before we start with Jen, Mr. Chairman, if I could give I know we have some new board members and also for members of the public, just briefly, we hear the term master plan a lot, and I think it's important for tonight that we that we understand it. I'm just going to give you just a legal background to it, and Jen will go through obviously the planning aspects, but the master plan is a document that's exclusively within the jurisdiction of the planning board. It is not a zoning ordinance, so I just want to make it clear that the master plan does not change zoning in and of itself anywhere. It's a policy document. It's a document that basically analyzes the town and makes policy determinations in terms of how and where the town should develop under particular circumstances. And that policy document does serve, or should serve, as guidance and support for zoning ordinances. The zoning ordinances implement the master plan. That's how the master plan basically gets its teeth. And then you'll see at the end, it's also important when we do the ordinance review, ordinances have to be referred to the planning board for a determination as to substantial consistency, because there's a preference in the law that ordinances be substantially consistent with that document. The master plan has to be reevaluated or reexamined at least every 10 years. It's a living, breathing document, that responds to actual changes and challenges and new technology and planning philosophies. So in Howell, we do it much more often to help keep pace with the surrounding circumstances that we're forced to deal with. So with that said, there are different elements of the master plan. Two of those elements you'll hear about tonight, and that's going to be our focus tonight. One of them is the land use element, and one is the circulation element. So what you'll hear tonight is testimony from Jen as to what the proposed amendments and revisions are to the master plan, and they relate just to those two elements. The board will have an opportunity to ask questions. The board will have an opportunity to make comments. The hearing will also be open to the public, and the public has a right to ask questions if they wish. They can offer their own testimony, and if someone has experts that they wish to present, they can also present expert testimony to the board. At the conclusion of the process, the board will vote either to amend the master plan pursuant to the recommendations. It may vote to take some recommendations, not others. It may even vote to say, nice try, Jen, but we're not doing any of that. But those are basically all of the options. So with that background, I'll turn it over to Jen to begin the process.
Mr. Cuchero, I could just ask you to please clarify. This policy document is not. So let's say, and just so to clarify for myself and for the newer board members, let's say an applicant comes up, right? And we have something in our land use element that allows or disallows, something they can or can't do on their land. Until the governing body actually creates an ordinance about this thing with someone's property, it's just a policy document.
Well, it is a policy document, but it would also have relevance, particularly before the zoning board, not this board, but the zoning board. In a use variance, the enhanced criteria requires you to compare the proposed use with the master plan. So it would be relevant, say, if the master plan did promote a particular use and it was not enacted by ordinance, an applicant before the zoning board would certainly point that out and rely upon that. And even an applicant before the planning board who might need a C variance might say that the C variance helps to promote something in the master plan, even though it's not an ordinance. But certainly it does not carry, the same weight as an ordinance. It's not a requirement, but from a planning perspective, it could be used to support an argument in favor of relief.
Fair enough. Thank you. Okay, Ms. Bean, do you need to be sworn in?
Probably, right, Ron?
Yep. You swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give this board is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Okay, please state and spell your name for the record and tell us who you are.
Jennifer Beam, Beahm. I am the township planner, the planning board planner, and the zoning board planner for the Township of Howell. I get to go, Ron? So I want to start out with the circulation element because I think that that's very straightforward, and will probably dovetail into some of the recommendations later on in the land use element, if that's all right with you, Mr. Chair.
Absolutely.
So all of you have had a copy of the draft, but before we start, I just want to thank Joe Cristiano, Paul Bavai, Rob Nicastro, Councilwoman Richmond, and Councilwoman Brennan, who helped along the way. You know, we kind of did the nuts and bolts, and then they had provided us with some very vital and important information, as well as Matt Howard, who I couldn't have done this without. So I just wanted to put that on the record. This has been a process that started almost a year ago. And so when we looked at the town's circulation element, and why that's important is that there are information found within a circulation element that ties directly into certain things that you as a board, as well as the zoning board, deal with on a daily basis, which is mainly right-of-way dedication. So when we wind up with an application for development, the first thing, and I'm going to take credit for it, even though Jordan's on the call and he's really the one that looks into this, is that what is the requisite right-of-way that we need to have on this road based upon the circulation element of the master plan. Why that's important is that the town hasn't looked at the circulation element in about 30 years. And as I'm sure all of you on the call can attest to, is the fact that over the course of the past 30 years, things in town have changed significantly. And some sleepy roads have now become some major thoroughfares that warrant a relook. So what we did is we took a look at what exactly it is we're hoping to accomplish with this element. And if you want to follow along on page 2, generally the goal of a circulation plan is to provide, you know, the framework for safe and efficient movement of persons and goods throughout the township. And so we have a series of recommended policies, which are general in nature, talking about safe, efficient movement, safe, efficient design, driveway separation, trying to avoid, you know, creating additional traffic volume problems, and to utilize standard techniques like daily trips to evaluate the impacts of proposed developments. And those are very general in nature, and that's pretty consistent with most master plan elements. You have kind of like a 10,000 foot situation, and then as we move forward through the element, it drills down a little bit more specifically with respect to specific uses and recommendations. So Matt, if you want to move to page 3. Thank you. So if you look on page 3, and I'll defer to you, Mr. Chair, if you want me to read all these into the record, or you want me to talk about them globally and then address concerns specifically if they come up. You just let me how you want to handle it. Let me know.
Mr. Chair, what is your recommendation? I'm sorry, I don't mean to pass
That's fine.
over the court. I think we should just do a general overview.
And I'm here. I mean, obviously I'm not going anywhere. So if anyone has any specific questions on anything, you're more than welcome to ask me. But generally, we took a look, and it was a very interesting look back because, as we all know, we're just kind of, hopefully, fingers crossed, coming out of the pandemic when there weren't as many cars on the road, specifically in 2020, than there have been historically, and are looking, you know, based upon my personal experience lately, looks like things are starting to pick up. So we took a look back, you know, historically at what's happening currently, and we're projecting things forward. And we have some specific recommendations that the plan seeks to accomplish. And some of them are very specific. We took a look at Maxim Southern Road. I also want to just take one half step back. I know that this has been a big concern of the general public. And so with the help of Matt and the township staff, we put a survey on the website asking the residents to identify for us specific areas, roads, intersections that the population of Howell felt were particularly concerning. And so we could focus, I mean, as you know, the town is 64 square miles, so we can't obviously take an in-depth look of every single road in town, but we tried to hit the highlights, and we utilized the wealth of knowledge that the public has. And Matt, how long was that survey up there for? Like a month?
About a month, yes.
So, you know, we left it up. We asked everyone to give their opinion. So a lot of these recommendations are us taking a look at those areas where the public highlighted as important for us to take a look. So Maxim Southern Road, you know, there's always the question of, is there the ability to widen some of these roads? And absent a development application that would require roadway dedication, any widening would then be required of the township to fund land acquisition, which is unlikely. It's unfortunate, but it's unlikely. So one of the recommendations is to make sure that some of these roads are not overburdened, and that, for example, Maxim Southern Road, you know, the goal is to maintain the higher ARE designations, ARE3, ARE6, to keep high density development and intense development off this road because of its configuration and width. If you want to scroll down to Newton's Corner Road, Matt. You know, we looked at Newton's Corner Road. This is obviously, there's been some significant improvements over in this section of town. And again, you know, we have small front yards, we have limited availability to widen. There's areas in and around this section of town that are zoned large lot residential that would enable us to keep the density in this area kind of a lower, large lot residential. And the recommendation would be to discourage high density development or any kind of intense development. In this particular area, we made a recommendation that, you know, the township should look into potentially restricting weights, which would limit, you know, truck traffic and things like that on the roadways, and evaluate some of the areas for intersection improvements. Moving down, Matt, to Locust Ave. Thanks. Locust Ave near Maxim Southern Road, they already exist larger lot residential ARE3. The development, though, is inconsistent with the zoning, especially the commercial industrial development. We should make sure that we're looking to maintain some larger lot development to prevent overdevelopment and congestion in this area. So when you get down to Lanes Mill Road, right? Lanes Mill Road is kind of a unique animal as you get towards closer to 9. You know, that intersection with Lanes Mill and 9 is what, 6 lanes across at this point. There's been significant intersection improvements through the development that's occurred. But as you move farther to the east, you know, it narrows down and becomes a little bit more residentially in character, larger lot residential, and we would look to try to prevent creep of that intense commercial development that you find like in the Route 9 area farther to the east, because the road network really in that area cannot handle any kind of intense development based upon its geography and its width. West Farms Road. Now this is a tough one because West Farms Road, you know, back in the day was kind of a sleepy road, almost like a farm road, and has become kind of a cut through, limited shoulders, limited width. The majority of the road really is residential with some scattered, there's a daycare and some other kinds of commercial uses. There's a couple of churches in that area. But there's also issues with West Farms Road in terms of site distance, the geography of the road, especially as you're heading to the west, getting close to Route 9. Some of the area closer to like Turpac create some site distance issues. So care should be given to development in this area to make sure that driveways are safe, site distance and site triangles are maintained, and right-of-way acquisition is obtained wherever possible whenever a development application comes in. Because even right now, when you drive down West Farms Road, when the mailman is delivering the mail, you literally have to go on the opposing side of traffic to get around. So it's definitely an area of town that we're well aware, and it does become a little bit more intense as you get closer to Route 9. And I think that you know, that's okay, because there may be significant opportunities to provide, you know, some greater widths there. But as you get farther, I'm guessing that's east, right? It runs east-west as you head towards 524. You know, you have the new light that went up. That was great because that intersection by where Kirk's Florist is was a little dicey to get through there. So that was a really great improvement that we've already made. But this is a road that's on our radar and should be continued to be watched over the course of significant years to come. Ford Road and Kent Road, my favorite. Ford Road and Kent Road have presented significant challenges, namely because where Ford Road intersects Route 9, it's not divided. Right? The barrier on Route 9 stops before it extends past Ford Road. And there's been significant accidents at that location with cars trying to either turn left onto Ford Road or left onto Route 9 North. And, you know, one of the things that would be great is if that barrier could be extended farther to the south to prevent that from even being an enticing movement. However, Kent and Ford Road, in addition, you know, that area, you know, where possible, widening should be obtained. So right of ways we should make sure if development applications come in, we get the requisite right of way on those roads because they have become more heavily traveled over the course of the past couple of years. Vanderveer Road, that's on the next page, Matt. Looking at perhaps removing the weight restriction from Howell Road to the north, having it remain in place to the south because that's where the geometry of the road becomes challenging and it becomes very narrow. We are looking to encourage some right turns only from Industrial Court onto Vanderveer, which heads the traffic back to the north, and perhaps look at some capital improvements in that area at the intersection of Vanderveer and Howell Road. I think development in this area, specifically of town in general, warrants some consideration as far as being cognizant of increasing traffic patterns and trying to maintain control of that so that we don't wind up behind and we stay ahead of the curve on those areas as well. Havens Bridge and Lemon Road, you know, we have taken a look at this, and this kind of ties into the West Farms Road conversation. This section has become a little bit more heavily traveled, and we had made some specific recommendations, but these roads are on our radar. We need to take a look at them, get right of way where possible, make sure that there's adequate sight distance on driveways and roadway intersections, and make sure that where possible, we add some stop signs and some control to avoid potential for accidents. Moving to the next page, we have Windler, Aldridge, Oakland, Old Tavern, where all of those roadways intersect. That's a pretty heavily traveled roadway too. It's close to the reservoir, so you have people going to the reservoir for recreation. You have people trying to avoid traffic on Route 9. And it's definitely something to be considered for widening, looking at getting right-of-way widths where possible. Again, we're recommending additional signage, maybe some stop control, and to make sure that, you know, as we move forward for the next 10 years or however many years it is until this is evaluated again, that, you know, we don't create safety concerns at these locations. That follows into Aldridge Road. This is the Aldridge Road that's a little farther to the south. You know, as we all know, I'm sure in town, the intersection of Aldridge Road and Route 9 is basically the bane of everybody's existence. It backs Route 9 up, it backs Aldridge Road up, both directions. The concern is, you know, obviously Route 9 is not within our control, but it's definitely something to keep in mind. The benefit is this area is pretty built out. You know, sometimes we have a couple infill developments here or there, but we're not expecting significant development applications in Howell along this right of way, considering, you know, it's pretty residential, almost in both directions, obviously with the exception of the intersection with Route 9, but it definitely, and I do agree, we did discuss this significantly, perhaps recommending that the county take over that roadway, considering it does traverse between Howell and Jackson and is pretty heavily traveled in both directions. And then finally, we talk about Arnold Boulevard. You know, Arnold Boulevard historically has been pretty sleepy until relatively recently, but at the end of the day, it's a pretty narrow roadway, and this one is going to dovetail into some of the land use recommendations that you're going to hear later. It's unlikely that we're going to get any significant right-of-way, especially, you know, at the expense of the township, and that, you know, a discouragement of trucks moving specifically to the east across some of these roads, which are really narrow and winding, and the geometry becomes a little challenging. So, looking into some weight restrictions on this road was also a discussion that came up through the course of our evaluations. So those are kind of some of the specific recommendations came up when we looked at these areas that the public had targeted in the survey. Obviously, it's not every single road in town, but these are kind of the heavy hitters. And, I think it's important that we've identified them within the plan so that, Matt's office or the engineering office, as well as, the planning and engineering professionals for the boards know that these roads are of concern and are particularly careful when evaluating development applications along these roadways. Moving down to, we looked at, and we're going to kind of skip through, Matt. So we looked at, all the different modes of transportation. Obviously New Jersey Transit is here. We have the park and ride. The county has a classification system, as does most other government entities. So we've identified those different classifications in table 2, which range from freeway, expressway, all the way down to local streets. And that's going to become important later when we talk about the traffic counts that we've done. We've identified some roadways and characterize them in the different classifications so that you can see what they're characterized and what the right-of-way width would be. That's also important for your professionals when they're evaluating development applications to make sure that they get the requisite right-of-way dedications. So I want to move on to, I think we're going to move on to page 17, Matt. So what we did was we took a look at crash data. We took a look at police reports through not just the township, but the DOT has a database. And we identified, the heavy hitters on table 5, ranging from Route 9, which obviously, and I'm sure no one would be surprised, is the winner of this category with over 1,900 total crashes in the past, I guess, 5 years, right? 15 to 20. And then ranging downward from Route 9 to Newton's Corner Road. These are the top 10 of major accidents. It's not an exhaustive list. If anybody has any interest in a specific road later, you can I'll be more than happy to get the information for you if it's available. But it's important to note that, yes, I understand that accidents occur on other roads other than these 10, but these are the most notable, and as you get down to Fort Plains and Newton's Quarter, they're pretty even. But when you're dealing with Route 9, Route 33, 195, 547, and 524, and that's where you would expect the majority of traffic to be. Those are the predominant accident corridors within the township. It is very important to note that we have absolutely zero control over any of those roads. Obviously 9, 33, that's DOT, as well as 195. And then 547 and 524 are under the county's jurisdiction. So while it's important information to have and to understand as we're looking at applications along those roadways, we do not have any control over speed limit, stop signs, widening, et cetera. Those are outside of our jurisdiction. If you want to move on to page 19, Matt. And there's associated mapping that's within the plan that if you want to look specifically, you can do that. But table 6 identify the problem intersections based on crash data, and it looks like what you would typically expect. Obviously, the major corridors that we discussed earlier and the associated intersections are ranking from number 1 at 33 and 34, which I would understand because that's a pretty dicey loop around there, all the way down to Route 9 West Farms Road. And as we all know, there was a pretty major accident there last weekend that obviously was not included in the document since it was done prior to that. But I had the pleasure of sitting in traffic for quite some time while that accident was cleared. So I do understand the complications associated with these accidents when they occur because it's difficult to circumvent and it does back up traffic in town. If we move to the next page, we have these intersections studied, the total crashes, and then ATD. Okay, so let me go back. When the survey was up and the votes were collected, we sat down and we evaluated which roadways were going to be analyzed. And when I say analyzed, what we did was we put those tubes down. I'm sure you guys have driven over those tubes a million times. We left those tubes down for 2 weeks and they took counts 24 hours a day for 2 weeks. At the end of the 2 weeks, the counters were taken up. the data was analyzed and it was sent to our office, and we did an analysis of these 12 intersections, which is what we counted. And the ATD is average daily trips. So you can see that Maxim Southern Road has average daily trips of 4,437 cars or trucks in a given day, average daily. The prior classification of roadway is collector, and we're making a recommendation that it move up to major arterial based on the number of trips. If you, Matt, can you just scroll to the next page just quickly? So here on this table generally has, based upon the average daily trips, what the categorization should be. So it's not like I just made it up, right? It came from DOT data. And so we evaluated the average daily trips based on the counters, and then we made some recommendations. This is important for a couple reasons. One, like I said earlier, it will help us to get the right widths of the road as development occurs along these roads. And then there's some other zoning implications that we'll talk about when we get to the land use element. So it's important to just keep that in mind. But what we've done is these are the 12 that we evaluated. Should the township wish to study additional roadways moving further, we're more than happy to do that. But we were tasked with doing 10. We felt very strongly that the 12 was more appropriate. And so we did that within our existing scope. It didn't cost any more money for us to look at those 2 additional roadways. And so all in all, what this element has done, I know I've been talking for a while now, what this element has done is it's kind of updated the circulation, the different circulation patterns within the township: bus, car, obviously roadway designations. We've identified crash data, et cetera. So it's kind of like a more recent snapshot from what occurred 30 years ago and then has happened since then. So at the end of the day, you know, this is like we said, and I think Ron alluded to earlier, that, you know, this is a policy document. It provides informational in nature. It really doesn't, you know, when we get to the land use element, which we'll do after this, that's where the recommendations for different changes come in. This is more informational in nature and kind of updates the snapshot of Howell. It's not all expansive, but I think it's a big leap from what we had 30 years ago in the prior circulation element that the township had. So with that, I guess, I don't know how you want to handle it, Ron or Mr. Chair, in terms of questions or
What I'd recommend, Mr. Chairman, certainly if the board has any questions, to go ahead and make them, but after that Jennifer just proceed after that into the land use element, and then it can be open to the public to discuss whatever they would like.
Okay.
You know, with regard to both, rather than being limited in scope and having to, you know, make comments and testify multiple times.
Okay, I appreciate that. Jen, do you know if your team had any chance to look at Oak Glen and Maxim Southern?
We looked at Maxim Southern in the area of Oak Glen, but we focused on Oak Glen at the Windler Aldridge area. And then we looked at, you know, where it intersects with Randolph, like down in that area, Arnold, Randolph, down in that area. But it did not get a lot of votes on the on the survey, and we had a lot of other areas that had higher interest. So we can certainly look at that, but that was not, you know, we looked at it in the area of those intersections and those roadways, but not in and of itself.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you. Does anybody else on the board have any questions or comments?
Jen, just for public edification, you're talking about changes of road classifications or recommendations of the change based on the traffic counts. Does the change in classification of a road require the zoning to change? Because that's been talked about.
It does not. There are a couple of, that's a really good question, because I know that came up a lot when we were talking about whether the town was going to even undertake this initiative or not. So at the end of the day, the zoning dictates the development, not the classification of roadway. That will, for the most part, only dictate the width of the road. You have a couple of uses, which we're going to get into with the land use element, that are conditional uses in town that are, one of the conditions is, you know, frontage on a specific classification of roadway.
Mhm.
And so for those uses which are more like public assembly type uses, we did take a look at that, and I'm going to get that into that in a little bit more detail on how we manage that, because there were a couple of areas where the road classification is recommended to change, which could potentially open up other areas of the township for different kinds of development. But by and large, with the exception being those few uses, no, the zoning controls development. And so as we go through these land use recommendations and what we're, you know, recommending for zoning changes, as was said in the beginning, this is still only recommendations. So at the end of the day, the governing body can choose to do all of it, none of it, some of it, whatever. But the classification, really the importance of it right now is making sure we get the right of-way widths.
Excellent.
Thank you. Good question. Anybody got anything else? Okay, seeing none, Ms. Beam, please continue to the land use element.
Okay. So land use element is always the most fun because it involves taking a look at how the land use patterns in town have been proposed and then how they've developed over time and whether you should reconcile that, make changes, what have you. This document is significantly larger because we've accompanied some recommendations with associated mapping. And Matt's doing a great job on the share screen because that's just outside my skill set. And we'll get to that, but I just want to go over a couple of things which I'm going to skip, and Matt, you don't have to move the cursor or anything, but and Ron, you could probably jump in on this as well. So was it last year the state came out with legislation that said if a municipality was revising its land use element, they had to evaluate sustainability, smart growth, you know, those types of things into the land use element. Was that last year or was it
that I believe it was last year, and the result of that is a significant amount of work on sustainability and environmental planning that you may not have anticipated, but is now required in order to do anything else that you would like to do with the land use element.
Yep.
So we have included that sustainability element as required in the back of this document. And I want to just talk about that first, because my guess is that the lion's share of the interest is going to be on the various recommendations for changes in the zoning, definitions, etc. So it's up to you, Matt, but it starts on page 36. And we've looked at different things like sea level rise, smart growth principles. Let me give him a second. Right. So it's all there. It's very, it's a great read. I'm just kidding. So, I mean, it's important. There's definitely important things in there. It talks about electric vehicle. I mean, I'm sure we're all very aware of that electric vehicle legislation that passed. It identifies in here, which I think if you scroll down to the next page, Matt, on this map, which I think maybe what I can do for you, Matt, and your office is make a number of these maps so that you guys can hand them out, because what it does is identifies the electric charging stations within the town so that if somebody does have an electric car, they know. I mean, I'm assuming they can figure it out. And obviously, I'm sure people are a lot more tech savvy than I am and have some super duper app that identifies it. But for those of us that are not so tech savvy, it might be nice to have these to hand out. We move on to the next page where we talk about storm resiliency. Obviously, this is a pretty sensitive subject. I mean, it seems to me just shocking that it's been 10 years since Sandy now, almost 10 years. It seems like it just happened yesterday. And we looked at a variety of things. Obviously, the state has incorporated new stormwater management rules, which the township in accordance with state requirements has implemented that or adopted that as part of their ordinances. And I do want to just take one half second. I know we're kind of focused, but I also want to just make sure it's important to note that we not so like, I think it was last year, like late last year, this board adopted the new conservation element, which the township had an outside consultant do a very comprehensive environmental inventory, which was attached to that document. So I don't want to make it that I'm just kind of flipping through this and environmental sensitivity is not a high priority. We did a very comprehensive document just last year, which is also, it's up on the website. It has a lot of information. So a lot of the information we utilize, came from that as well. We have some recommendations for green energy, and that's been something that I can say this board really has asked about, especially in circumstances where you have flat roofs that could potentially have solar panels. We looked at climate change vulnerability, and while, we've seen a lot of mapping, I'm sure everyone's seen the mapping when, sea level rises, then, all these like multi-million-dollar shore communities are going to become, the lost city of Atlantis, but it still does have some impact. We do have tributaries that go out to those flood prone areas, and how the climate change vulnerability, we did an assessment of that and analysis of future threats. We looked at temperature. If you want to move down to page 43 and 44, we looked at different temperature charts. To make sure, we looked also at how the township handles fire. I'm sure all of you guys are well aware that, I don't know, not that long ago, it had to be in the fall. There was a big fire on the parkway, jumped over the parkway was closed. So, it's important to note that the town does have a plan in place to work with the county, the state, to do the best we can. There is a lot of wooded area within the community to ensure that in the event of a fire, which in some instances is uncontrollable, that there's a plan in place to address it. We evaluated flood hazard implications, which, the state also has pretty restrictive regulations associated with this. And I can attest that I have been stimulated at many a board meeting talking about implications to flood hazard areas and regulatory requirements associated with that. We also took a look at things like how to manage hurricanes and nor'easters, dam failures, which is not something that you see often, but if it does happen, it could potentially be very damaging. And we evaluated build out trends and, by looking at the number of housing units by building permit and looking at what could potentially occur in the future. I do think some of the circulation recommendations, as well as some of the recommendations that we'll get to in a couple minutes, do lend itself to being cognizant of, what we don't want to have happen here in Howell is we don't want every square inch of the town and every blade of grass eliminated for pavement concrete development. So, being cognizant of what that entails is important. We've evaluated major evacuation routes within the community, as well as critical facilities, fire stations, schools, first aid, police, as well as strategies and recommendations. So all of that, sustainable information that is required under the state statute is incorporated into this document. And it does dovetail onto that conservation element that we discussed last year and was approved last year. So now we get to the land use recommendations. I'm sorry, Matt, can we go back to, really, we'll start on page 1, but we're gonna move through that relatively quickly. But I think where we really want to start discussing in depth is probably page 11. So these recommendations that are in the beginning of this document, starting on page 2 and goes towards page 11 and 12, are really just a regurgitation of the recommendations that came out of the master plan initiative from 2019. And we looked at it, made sure that all of these recommendations were still valid. And And there's some minor tweaks here and there from some of the 2019 recommendations, maybe looking at alternative lot sizes for different kinds of businesses. But by and large, those recommendations that are still applicable, I mean, I know it's not that long later, but it seems like forever since we had the pandemic in the middle of it, that these recommendations still remain valid. So what did we do for a year, right? I mean, I'm whipping through this in half an hour. So what we did do is we evaluated, if we want to move to like page 11, Matt. And I'm just going to dig it. I'm just going to dive in head first because I might as well rip the Band-Aid off. So obviously one of the big concerns that has come before this town, as well as a number of other communities in Monmouth County, is this boom of warehouse applications and developments, and what the implications of these types of developments on the township entail. And some of our zoning dates back to years and years and years ago, when a warehouse was simply just a big building where things were stored. There wasn't a lot of in and out. There wasn't a lot of distribution. There definitely wasn't all this online business and fulfillment and in and out. So there are some areas of the township that it made sense to look at some higher density warehousing, and then others were just solely inappropriate. We do have some SED zones in town that are kind of right in the heart of the center of town, where the roadway network are really not designed for heavy truck traffic, and that perhaps, distribution and whatnot would just be not appropriate. So these are still some recommendations back from 2019, but we did make some changes, which basically took out warehouse distribution out of this SED light zone, which was a recommendation previously. And then the major one, which is on the next page right there in bold, is that the township should consider reevaluating the SED zones throughout the township. And that's one of the things that took us pretty much the longest, right, Matt, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely.
And so what we've done is that we've taken a hard look at the zones in the town, and we've made recommendations for the following zoning districts. And I'm going to rattle them off. And these pages that you have before you, basically 14, 15, these are just the zoning districts that have existing uses currently in the ordinance that we have recommended some changes. So I'm just going to go through them, and then we can talk about them individually. So we've recommended an HD4. That's the area that we're going to recommend up along 33, and we'll get into the mapping of that in a little bit, Matt. I don't know if all of you remember, but I certainly remember that there was a point in time where we made recommendations to take SED and break it into, I don't know, what was it, 7 different SED zoning districts, right? This is going back, I'm dating myself. And then we kind of pulled it back in. And now we're looking at it, given the current land use pattern, that all SEDs are not created equal. So we've made recommendations in this document to have an SED1, an SED2, and an SED2 overlay. And we're going to get into specifically where they're located, but we have 3 different designations of SED. We have some recommendations to change some areas that are non-residential to residential. We're looking to correct some errors in the zoning map that have occurred and have not been fixed over time, which would enable residents to not have to go to the zoning board if they want to put a deck or an addition on their house. And we've made some recommendation changes to the HD3 and the NC zoning district. And so if we move from go to page 14. Well, you're ahead of me, man. You are good. So the HD4 zone, and I just want to talk about these generically, and we can always come back if you have questions about specific districts, but basically this is a zoning district that we're creating up along 33, or okay, let me take it back. We're recommending be created. Okay, so I don't want to make it sound like if you guys say yes, it's created. We're making recommendations that the zoning district be created. And all of these things are just that, recommendations. And what we did was we took the uses in the HD3, And we took out those that were inappropriate, which would be age-restricted housing, daycare facilities, and we've added a series of uses permitted, which would be the distilleries, assisted living, and self-storage. And then we've added a number of conditional uses, proposed conditional uses, all of which would have to meet a series of conditions in order for them to be permitted in this area. And those range from warehouse down to trade contractor businesses. It's also important to note that we've also taken a hard look at our definitions associated with this conversation, and we've created definitions for the uses that you see here that we did not currently have definitions for, and we've made a couple modifications. So I'm going to get to that in a little bit, but that's important to note too, because that's going to be very critical when we get into the distinction between specifically the different SED zoning districts. Moving on down to the bottom of page 15 right there is, so what we've done is in the SET2 area, which goes back to all SEDs are not equal, we've eliminated warehouse distribution because we just feel that those sections of town really cannot sustain high intense traffic. We talked about that in the circulation element with respect to widths, geography, limited ability to get right of way, perhaps implementing some weight limits, but we didn't want to preclude self-storage facilities. Prior to this, self-storage facilities were kind of lumped in as a warehouse, and I guess it is a warehouse, but it's a very different animal. You know, it's a very low traffic generator. It doesn't generate a lot of high value truck traffic. And so in certain sections, it would be appropriate where the higher intense warehousing uses would not be. So that was one of the major changes in this SET2 zone. Moving forward to the overlay, which is, you got it, right? Yep. It's the same recommendation. So the overlay, taking into consideration that perhaps some self-storage facilities will be appropriate in these areas, but high density warehouse distribution facilities would not be appropriate. And the next page, which is page 18, really talks about the different definitions, the definition of fulfillment, the definition of just a warehouse, the definition of distribution, the definition of self-storage, and the ever popular flex space, which everybody uses flex space and then decides it's going to do whatever it wants. Now we have put in a definition or a recommendation for a definition of flex space so as to differentiate it from the other warehouse types uses within the township. One of the other things that we've done and in this recommendation, which starts on number 35, which is at the bottom of the page, is we've taken a look at the definition of schools. We have eliminated some of the provisions that would be considered, I guess, Ron, what would be the word, exclusionary with respect to like the state curriculum, et cetera.
It brings it into compliance with the federal and our state courts definitions of how these particular uses should be defined.
Thank you. And so, but what we have done though, is that this use, along with other similar uses, which could be characterized as areas of public assembly, which would include like a bowling alley or areas where a lot of people would gather, those types of uses are now going to be required to connect to sewer, as well as the fact that we're still prohibiting faculty housing, which, you know, I know is a concern, not just here, but everywhere within the state in general. So, so these are recommendations that we've made. Following that are some general recommendations with respect to, you know, look at bulk standards for some of these new zoning districts. Look at the, you know, we need to establish the conditional use requirements for these types of uses. You know, a master plan is not obligated to write a zoning ordinance. It's looking at making recommendations so that a zoning ordinance, if the governing body so chooses to do, will can implement it in whatever way they see fit. So some of these are more general in nature. Number 44 is one I think that.
Jen, if I could just stop you there. It's a policy document and they are recommendations, but there is a presumption in the law that recommendations contained in the master plan, which it's not just like a resolution or something, it's a formal document that goes through public hearings. It's adopted by the planning board that has, spots for 2 of the 5 members of the council. So the law does have a presumption that, it's something more than just a mere recommendation, that it is going to support, future zoning amendments. So I would just, throw that out there.
Thanks, Ron.
Mhm.
One of the recommendations that I did want to spend maybe 2 minutes talking about, I'm sorry, Matt, can you scroll back up to 37? So the township has had multiple meetings and conversations with representatives of Weapons Station Earl, and they're undertaking an evaluation of the properties that border the Naval Weapons Station and have requested that the towns, I think there's 5 towns that border the Earl, include this military, it's like a military exclusion zone, right? Which is, what is it, 1,000 feet, Matt?
2,000.
2,000 feet from the border, and that the goal would be to.
Jen, also, just before you go on, Matt's participated a bunch of times now, so I just want to swear him in and have him, enter who he is. Do you swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give this board is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Matt, if you could just place your name on the record and explain to the public what your role is in the municipality.
Sure. My name is Matthew Howard. I'm the Director of Community Development. I'm also the zoning officer.
Okay, go ahead.
So Naval Station, the county is spearheading this initiative for the Naval Station and has asked these 5 towns to take a look at perhaps incorporating this military exclusion zone around the border of Earl. As you all know, that's the northern portion of town. So we, in an attempt to be cooperative with both the county and Earl, have included a recommendation that we evaluated and perhaps create an overlay or a zoning district for this military exclusion zone. And rounding out this very boring conversation that I'm making you endure, we had some recommendations to change the conditional uses for the gas stations. In fact, I think that was already implemented by the governing body relatively recently. And then lastly, similar to the schools, we made some changes to the house of worship definition in that we modified the parking to be a little bit more inclusive of all different types of houses of worship, which would enable us to calculate parking. And as with other areas of public assembly, similar to the schools and to bowling alleys, et cetera, we require connection to the sewer. So these
Jen,
are,
just before you move on to that, what the reference there, correct me if I'm wrong, is a recognition that not all houses of worship actually have seating in the worship areas, that in some instances people are sitting down, some may be lying down, and that the old reference to number of seats wasn't something that was applicable across the board. And the way that it's been done now, no matter how it is that your particular religion conducts its worship, it'll be covered by the way that we're addressing parking in this way.
thank you.
I'm just saying that, is that correct?
Yes. Oh, yes.
Okay.
Sorry. Yes, it is.
Okay.
Sorry. Okay. So now I think we're going to get into the mapping. So the first recommendation, which is on the first map, Matt, so they're not always in sequence because we did them by section of town.
Which proposal number?
We're going to start with proposal 1. These are all the way at the end for those who want to follow along. There we go, right there. So proposal 1 is identified in green. It's in the, I guess, top left. I gotta sometimes think about my left or my right. That's the area that is being proposed to change from SED to HD4. These are areas that we're looking to allow for those uses that are appropriate for highway development, but also those conditional uses that we discussed, ranging from warehousing to automobile repair to contractors, facilities. You know, the purpose there is, number one, we're on a state highway, and it allows us to, to take advantage of the economic development activity, but while keeping it kind of on the periphery and along the higher roadway classifications. Proposal 2, which is on the same map, which is pink. Those are being recommended to change from HD2 to HD4. So those are, again, so that we would have one cohesive zoning district in this section of town. Proposal 3 is in the middle of the screen. That's kind of like, I don't know, plum. Does that work for you?
Mhm.
And again, that's also lending itself to that HD4 zoning district. And the reason that they're separate proposals is that all those properties are zoned differently. So we have to separate them out. That again would be proposed to be zoned HD4. And then proposal number 4, which is little green area. Yep. Again, those lots which are fronting on the state highway would be, they're on the north side of the 33 slip ramp. They are being proposed to be rezoned from ARE2 to HD4, kind of creating one cohesive zoning district in this section of town. The next one is proposal number 5, which is the blue that's on the right side of the screen. Again, those lots are proposed to be rezoned from HD2 to HD4. And then proposal number 6, which is in the next map, right there, that's the turquoise area. Those lots are proposed to go from ARE6 to HD4. And I think it's just based on the nature of how this area is developed over time, and to make one cohesive zoning district within this section of town. Proposal number 7, which is on the same map, but on the bottom, scroll down a little bit. Proposal number 7, these are parcels on Yellowbrook Road. The proposal is to take, some of them are SED, and some of them are, well, one is a split zone of ARE6 and SED, and to change that to SED1, which is still industrial in nature, which is generally how this section of Yellowbrook Road exists today. And then proposal 8, which is on the top of the map, which is the light blue, that's that military zone, because number one, that's Earl. So no matter what we say about that, they're gonna do what they want to do regardless. The next proposal is proposal 9, which is on this map. It's a little area that's on Tinton Falls Road. This area we're proposing to be rezoned from HD3 to ARE1. So we're going to make that more residential in neighborhood nature, given what's transpired out there. Proposal 10, which is immediately below it, is rezoning from HD3 to RRC. Those are properties associated with the golf course, are they not, Matt? So
Correct.
so those
They're
are, that's
directly
just
adjacent and vacant right now.
right. So those are lots that would be incorporated into the golf course development. Proposal 11, let me see where that is. That's on the next map. This is Tinton Falls Road over by Asbury Avenue. Proposal 11 is, they're broken up. They're like salmon colored. I have to say, Isabel, who's on the call, she really did a good job with these colors, man. These are being rezoned from SED to R50. They're residential lots, and the SED zoning would prevent these residents from being able to do anything with their property without going to the zoning board. So it's just really modifying the zoning to be more appropriate. Proposal 12, which is on the top, kind of the rust area, is rezoning it from SED to HD3. It's more compatible with the highway corridor at that location, and SED would be inappropriate on that size lot, or that will be our opinion, my opinion. Proposal 13, give me a second, that's on the next map. Right, so proposal 13 is Matthews Road. We're recommending that these lots be rezoned from ARE3 to R3. They're undersized. None of those lots are 3 acres in nature, and they're surrounded by smaller lots, and this would be more appropriate zoning designation for that area. Proposal 14 is immediately on the other side of Lakewood Farmingdale Road. These lots, which are on Belmar Boulevard and Squonkam Road, are being recommended to be rezoned from ARE3 to NC, which is neighborhood commercial. These lots lead directly into Farmingdale's downtown district and will be more appropriate, in our opinion, for commercial development. Proposal 15. Now let me see where that is. Hold on.
Page 1.
You think it's page 1? Map 1?
Yep, you just passed it.
Yeah, but map 1, right, that's the first map. This is taking all these properties which are existing in the SED zoning district and redesignate them as SED 1. And as you remember, SED 2 and SED 2 overlay only allows self-storage, doesn't allow warehouse and distribution. So this area is just differentiating it from the other SED zones within the township. Proposal 16. It's on the 4th map. Yep, right there on the bottom there. This area is already industrial in nature, and the recommendation is to rezone it from ARE6 to SED2, which would be consistent with proposal 19, which is immediately above it. If you guys think about it, it's near the tracks. It has like the fireplace store and some other industrial type uses that are over there. They're not residentially zoned property, or they're not residentially used properties right now. This is kind of trying to make that zoning in that area consistent. Proposal 17 is on Fairfield Road. That is on the 2nd map. Yep, right there in purple. That's recommending incorporating that property into the HD4 zoning district, which is up and around this area. The change would allow almost all the same uses as HD2, but would add warehousing distribution as conditional, which would be consistent with the SED, which completely surrounds it in that area. 18, which is, hold on, is on the next map right there. So that's the north end of Yellowbrook Road as it goes up into 33. It's not the heavy industrial area. It's kind of, as you move forward, there's a lot of kind of mixed use properties in that area. We're recommending this for SED overlay. What that means is that the underlying ARE6 zoning would stay in place, would have no impact on a residential use should it want to stay there. But the SED overlay would allow some industrial uses because there are some kind of contractors, warehouses and stuff like that in the backs of people's properties. But SED2 overlay would only allow self-storage. It wouldn't allow heavy warehousing. Proposal 19, which is back there. Yeah, that's up. No, go back down, right there. It's over by proposal 9. No, yes. So that again is consistent with 16 to turn that area from SED to SED2, which would allow industrial uses, but no high density warehousing in that area. Proposal 20. That's on that map. Yeah. This area is going to go from SED to SED1. There are some warehouse facilities in this area, and there's access to county road networks. So this is just the redesignation of the SED zones. We're honing in. And SED and proposal 21, which is Randolph Road, this is proposing SED to SED2, which would be more of a lighter industrial, not heavy warehouse distribution. I think we talked about that and how that dovetailed into the circulation recommendations of this area based on the widths of the road, the geometry of the road, looking into proposing weight limits, and that this would be more appropriate for like a self-storage or an industrial type use than some kind of distribution facility. And that, my friends, is the proposals that are part of this land use element.
Well, I greatly appreciate that. I know the amount of work that you guys put into it and the master plan subcommittee did. So I very greatly appreciate it. I have a few comments, but before I speak, does anybody else on the board have anything they'd like to say? You got any
Mr. Chairman, I
questions?
have something to say.
Yes, sir.
Jen, that's a great job.
Thanks.
Just have one question, actually clarification more for the public. With the addition of the definitions in the warehouses, would we be able to get to control better of what warehouse goes where in town?
Yeah, so that was the intention of that recommendation, because we just had warehouse distribution. And so there really wasn't a differentiation from like high density fulfillment to warehouse distribution to storage to self-storage. And now the definitions make it clear, and flex too as well. The definitions make it clear, but also the different SED designations that we've recommended have separated it out. So it's not kind of a one size fits all throughout the entire town. So yes.
Thank you very much.
I'd like to thank you. I believe you guys also made some recommendations to start to look at the lighting as it relates to just the IES recommendations.
Yes, I know that's a personal one for you. Yes,
I
we were
appreciate
thinking
that.
of you when we made that recommendation.
Thank you. I have a couple of recommendations. Matt, are you able to bring up page 2?
Of the land use report?
Yes, please.
Just 1 second.
We're going to highlight. We're going to hone in on item 3, section D, please.
Yes,
So I noticed that we added the need for some evergreens in front of the fencing for repair services and so forth. And it makes a lot of sense to increase the beautification of our highway zones. I would recommend that all of the landscape and or commercial construction type uses that we define throughout, we made a definition for landscape businesses, that they follow those same requirements to have their fencing shaded by additional bushes so that their equipment can't be seen from the highways.
that's a good idea.
The other thing I'd recommend is if you go to page 8. And we're going to hone in on the definite or the statement for the landscape businesses, and right where your mouse was for trailer. So I see that we're defining that a landscape business has one space for each fleet vehicle or trailer. Ms. Beam, I'm wondering if we should make a recommendation to define trailer so that they don't think they can have storage, long-term storage trailers or anything like that. And that may conflict with that definition we have. I would recommend that it be defined as something like an equipment trailer,
Okay,
either a enclosed or non-enclosed trailer that's used to transport equipment not to be used for storage.
okay. That's a good point.
And then the last one was on page 4. What is the genesis in item number 10, section AI? What is the genesis and reasoning to if someone has an undersized lot and their structure gets destroyed and sewer system and sewer and septic or well is not, I mean, sewer or public water is not available in the area, what does that person do with their property? If let's say for instance, the health department would still grant them a septic system application, what's the genesis for this
So-
definition here?
So,
Want me to
Unintended
take that one, Jen?
consequences.
sure.
Yeah, so this is something that I noticed when I came in as zoning officer, that there's a lot of residential areas that in previous zoning had clustering options and allowed you for smaller lots. A perfect example is most of Ramtown. It's 8 to 10,000 square foot lots. They've been rezoned R3, which is a 15,000 square foot lot area. So technically, all of those lots are undersized. Now, they've been approved by subdivisions through the planning board back in the 80s, 70s, 90s, all the way up until today. So the intention here is that if they're, when I look at it as a zoning officer, if a house is completely destroyed, the new development should meet the current zoning. It didn't seem like a rational thought to have entire neighborhoods not be able to be rebuilt in the instance of total destruction. So my thinking here is to add some language that gives me as a zoning officer, ultimately allows those properties to be rebuilt in that case without coming back to the board. And it applies to those that have got some subdivision approval. It's not an old throwaway lot that's been there for forever, but it's something the town knows kind of it exists. And whether it's on septic or regular sewer, right, we're going to defer if it's on septic to Monmouth County Board of Health. If they have the proximity, they get an approval through that, then they're going to be able to rebuild their house.
You know what, Matt, I apologize. I may have read this. When I read this the other day, I may have read it wrong. So way I read it first, it was if someone loses their home and they have an undersized lot, they're not able to rebuild unless they have sewer service. Am I reading that wrong? This is allowing.
That's not the intention. That's not the way we worded it. It's mostly to say whether you're on sewer or septic, the zoning will allow you to rebuild.
Gotcha.
And
Okay.
if sewer's available, you could connect, or if you were. If it's not, and Monmouth County gives you a permit, yes, we're going to let you rebuild.
I apologize. I read it wrong at first. Thank you. Those are my comments. Good job, everyone.
Thank you.
Does anybody else on the board have any questions or comments? Seeing none,
Matt, you want to take that down for me? Thank you.
Mr. Cuchero, is it now time to open it for public comment?
Yes, it is, Mr. Chairman. Well, public comment, and also if anyone has any questions of Jen or Matt.
Okay, before we do that, does anybody from the board want to take a 5-minute break?
I just had a real quick question, Mr. Chairman, which might be more for Ron than anybody else. But I think it's important for the clarification of all of us as board members, but also anybody listening in the public. Because obviously these are all recommendations at this point. We say yes, it doesn't guarantee that anything changes. And Ron, correct me if I'm wrong, but if any planning board applications we have that are deemed complete, that are in the pipeline now, are going to be governed by the zoning ordinances that are in effect today, regardless of when these new changes will be adopted. Is that?
The municipal land use law was amended several years ago, and they used to have what was called the time of decision rule, which meant that a town could amend its ordinances at any point in the process, and that ordinance would be effective. They then changed it to the time of application rule, and we've had some cases that have further refined that rule. But effectively, if you have an application that's been deemed complete and you're in the hearing process, subject to some very limited exceptions, you vest in the rights afforded to you by the ordinance as it existed when you filed.
Perfect, thank you.
If anybody else doesn't have any questions, I'd like to just take 5 minutes before we open it for public comment.
Do we need the 5 or can we forge through?
I gotta hit the peak. I gotta hit.
Sounds like we need it.
That's why I need the 5 minutes. Sorry.
The board will now take a 5-minute recess. They'll be back at 8:26. The planning board will now reconvene.
Hey, thank you. One day, all right. Everybody's here. We'll now open it up to the public. Eileen, can you please explain to everybody how to unmute themselves and raise their hands, please?
Sure. At this time, the chairman has opened the hearing up for the public for questions or comments regarding the two reports that Ms. Beam has talked about. Anyone wishing to comment, please use the raise your hand feature. I'll bring you into the meeting one at a time. You'll have to give your name and address. You'll be sworn in and you need audio and video. If you're calling in, please use *9 to raise or lower your hand and *6 to mute or unmute yourself. And the first person we have is Sheila Hatami, Esquire.
Okay, is she in?
Yes, please turn on your audio and video.
Okay, counsel, are you here tonight representing a client or just as a member of the public?
Both.
Okay, so if you could just place your appearance on the record and give us the name and address of your client.
Sure. My name's Sheila Hatami. The law offices of Sheila S. Hatami, LLC. I'm an attorney representing Ann and Siavash Hatami and Siacom LLC, who own property along Yellowbrook Road. That's 37, 26, 28. I think that's all of them on Yellowbrook Road. I myself own property in Howell, not along Yellowbrook Road. And I grew up on Yellowbrook Road, and I'm familiar with the characteristics of the area.
So counsel, I would normally not swear in an attorney, but are you planning on giving legal arguments and testimony?
I am.
Okay, so let me swear you in then. Do you swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give this board is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Okay, go ahead.
Well, just for a moment, Mr. Cucchiaro, I have some prepared comments. I didn't hear a time limit.
No, there's no, as long as you are relevant and not repetitive, there's no hard time limit that we have.
Okay, what I'm thinking is I will run through my comments and questions, and then perhaps the board may have the courtesy of revisiting them and answering them. That way it's not, it doesn't get too far attenuated. Does that sound appropriate?
Sure. And then just, do you have any expert witnesses or lay witnesses, or is it only your presentation?
It's my presentation tonight. So if the board is going to vote tonight, then I would ask for an adjournment to bring, excuse me, sorry, my voice, to bring back a planning expert.
All right. So we'll deal with that request later, but go ahead, counsel.
Well, thank you so much. First, I'd like to thank Ms. Beam and Mr. Howard for their extensive work on this plan. I appreciate that the town is trying to keep the master plan current. It's certainly, as Ms. Beam said, it's a large town. There's a lot of ground to cover. In the last several years, since 2019, Howell's had an explosion of residential growth. I'm so sorry, I'm losing my voice. Especially in North Howell, along Route 33 and at 524 and Yellowbrook Road. Houses in this area, excuse me, the town has permitted houses to be developed in this area along 33 in that area. At the end of Yellowbrook Road at 524, nearby houses are now selling in multi-millions, which is unheard of for this area in North Howell. And the Monmouth County Parks have purchased a large tract right behind the parcels in Proposal 18 on Yellowbrook Road. And the town should pay special attention to these changes in the character of the area, which, as I said, were unheard of even just a few years ago. A brief comment on the circulation element. There was no data included for Route 33 and Yellowbrook Road intersection. There was a proposal for a light, but I think that knowing this, that crash data and the average daily trips would be helpful. So, excuse me, I'm so sorry. And I also wanted to know what Yellowbrook was classified as presently. Historically, it was a rural route, but in the past, when my clients have asked to have the speed limit lowered or petitioned the town, The response was that the speed limit was set by the state. But it seems to be that maybe it's a town issue versus instead of a state issue, and the recommendation is for it to be a county issue. I'm not clear on that, so I'd like some clarification. Moving on to the land use element. Concerning trade businesses, ordinance 188-4 should, I'd request that that particular ordinance as far as regarding trade businesses should specifically curtail large operations, especially construction. Lot size should be 40,000 square feet. Multiple tenants should be permitted without restriction. But if restrictions must be had, it could be a smaller restriction, like a minimum lot size of 500 square feet, or building size of 5,000 square feet with 1,500 square feet subdivisions, and a greater percentage permitted as office space, perhaps 50 to 75%. I had a question about the landscaping proposal for landscaping businesses. It says there's a section in there that says it does not include tree removal companies. And I'm wondering what zone does that use find a home in? And then I had I would request similar suggestions for the landscaping business as was delineated for the trade businesses. The similar lot size, 40,000 square feet, allowing multiple tenants on a location. And I did have a question as far as why there are no retail sales allowed. There are presently some retail landscape uses in other towns that are more densely populated. It seems to me that these trade uses would be in more rural areas and that they could handle the sale of, say, mulch or things of that nature. It just seemed appropriate, like for a more farming community like Howell. Moving on a little further, I see that the SED light zone is brought back from the 2019 revision, but it's changed for the better, I think. And it says it's developed with the intent to be a light industrial zone that may be more appropriate in areas where residences are located nearby. But then looking at the land use element, it's proposed for exactly nowhere. And I don't know if that's an oversight or what. It was previously applied to Yellowbrook. And I think, you know, it may be appropriate to look at that with a few tweaks that I'm going to suggest as an overlay for Yellowbrook. I think that it's appropriate for a SED light zone, especially in the area along Yellowbrook that's covered by Proposal 18, to include offices. And the zone as written now does include the landscaping and trade businesses as conditional uses. But one thing that should be very specifically prohibited are construction businesses. If it's applied on Yellowbrook Road, there would be 20 acres of construction right next to a residential zone and about 12 acres in the middle of it. So that's not really an appropriate place to have a bunch of construction in the middle of what is now an ARE6 zone and abutting an R3 zone. It does not permit warehousing and distribution, but it does permit self-storage. As Ms. Beam said, well, self-storage is kind of like warehousing. And the concern with this is that it does create traffic and access by transients. It is warehousing and it would be best placed in highway zones. The SED light zone should not permit any kind of manufacturing, except perhaps, and this could be more narrowly tailored, for boutique operations by skilled tradesmen or small companies, such as, you know, small furniture makers, craftsmen, sculptors, glass blowing, similar types of crafts would be appropriate. But the proposed ordinance language as outlined in the plan is not narrowly tailored enough to accomplish that type of a goal. As far as utility uses and communications uses, those should not be permitted to preserve a more rural character and excuse me. Conditional uses could also include veterinary facilities to complement dog breeders, pet boarders that may currently exist. It should absolutely bar crushing of concrete and asphalt. I think that's still occurring in this town. I don't know if it's permitted by ordinance at this point or if they're all pre-existing. Something the town may want to consider as well with some of these SED ordinances is whether or not there should be a limit on the hours of operation. And I also noticed that there is a restriction on maximum lot coverage, which is presently 70%. I think this should be reduced to 60%. And also, you might want to consider, excuse me. Excuse me 1 second, I'm sorry. Also might want to consider indicating the building coverage, the percentage of building coverage that's allowed on the lot. The recommendation to permit multiple tenants, I think is a great one. I think that multiple tenants should be permitted without restriction and that it should include flex space. If restrictions must be had, I'm going to advocate for a minimum size of like smaller restrictions, minimum size of 5,000 square feet with 1,500 square feet subdivisions, and that a greater percentage, perhaps 50 to 75%, could be used as office space. I'm going to move on. I have a couple more questions. What is the NC zone and where is it? And I'd like more detail on the evaluation of the military exclusion zone because Yellowbrook is so close and it looks like it would be included in that zone. I'm 100% in favor of adding banquet halls to Q Farm qualified properties. I think that's a great idea. I also think that the town should consider adding harvest host type permissions to qualified farms. I don't know if some of you may be familiar with that, some are not, but it's a camping thing where you're allowed to camp at somebody's farm. And it's a nice thing. It's a really nice way to spend a camping weekend, quite frankly. And now I do want to address the SED1 and SED2 proposals, especially as it applies to Yellowbrook. The proposals involve making warehousing and distribution conditional uses, but make self-storage a principal use. But again, as I said, it is warehousing. The town's been restricting SED uses, not expanding them, especially in the area of Yellowbrook Road. The heavy industry, manufacturing, and extensive noisy and unlimited operations, such as those permitted in the SED1, SED, and SE2 zones as proposed, especially as an overlay on the ARE6 zone along Yellowbrook Road, are not appropriate zoning and planning options where there are significant amount of residences, residential developments, and highly desirable access to local parks and town services in North Howell, such as it exists along Yellowbrook Road. The ARE6 zone on Yellowbrook Road is designed to act as a buffer between the residential and industrial or commercial zones. And this is from the ordinance. It's designed to preserve rural and agricultural uses and rural character. Right now, Yellowbrook Road has an SED zone, the ARE6 zone, and then an R3 zone. And the proposal 18, only covers a portion of the road, the ARE6 zone. I submit that if the town wants to encourage development in this area on the north of Yellowbrook Road between the R3 district and Cranberry Road, there's 21 total lots, there's 13 landowners, 15 residences. It's not equipped for truck traffic. There's some parcels in the SED zone currently existing on Yellowbrook Road that are undeveloped. And the zoning should reflect what's currently there. The proposed SED light zone with a few tweaks could be overlaid, or the area could be zoned ARE2 to provide a sufficient buffer to the R3 zone at the end of the road, the equestrian development behind the easterly parcels on Yellowbrook Road, or the park on the westerly side of Yellowbrook Road. To permit heavy industry along Yellowbrook Road is a danger to the environment. The residents would destroy the highly desirable characteristics of the area. As we speak, the high density development is being built at the end of Yellowbrook Road. And residences are what the town chose to encourage. It shouldn't deviate now from this plan. So SED2 overlay is not an appropriate or rational change to this particular zone. And then finally, I'd like to know whether the planning board is recommending against fulfillment centers or if they will be permitted in any zone. And again, as I said to Mr. Cucchiaro, if the board is finalizing and taking a vote tonight, I would request an adjournment to offer the testimony of a professional planner. Thank you for your time and your attention.
Thank you, Ms. Satan. Counselor, should what is the procedure?
So I think
should
there's
Jen-
been a lot of questions that have been raised. So what I would recommend, to the extent that she can, that Jen respond to those inquiries, and then we'll move from there because we have some decisions to make. But I think that's the proper place to begin.
Very good.
Okay, so starting out with the intersection of 33 and Yellowbrook Road, it wasn't studied because we have no control over it, as it's regulated and controlled by the DOT. And as I stated very early on in this presentation, the focus of the circulation element is given the size of the town and what we were hoping to accomplish, we were focusing on roadways and areas where we had jurisdiction and had the ability to make changes if necessary. Understanding that that intersection has been the subject of many, many conversations and study, it was determined by not just me that the resources associated with this initiative be focused elsewhere. Secondly, I appreciate the comments about the trade businesses and landscaping businesses. As I also stated earlier, they're making recommendations for them to be conditional, and that the establishment of those conditional uses, which is also a recommendation, has not been fully vetted. So I have taken the notes and I appreciate those recommendations. I, however, respectfully disagree with your assertion that the proposal 18 is inappropriate from a planning standpoint. I just wholeheartedly don't agree. I think that there are residences and the underlying zoning can remain intact, but to characterize that as a sleepy rural road, I just think is inappropriate. If it were a sleepy rural road, then the need for a light at the intersection of 33 and Yellowbrook Road would not be necessary. So while I can respect your opinion, I respectfully and professionally do not agree. Secondly, the NC zone is neighborhood commercial. It's existing on the zoning map. Coming to mind is the area in Ramtown.
Adelphia Road also.
Pardon?
Adelphia Road also has a neighborhood commercial zone.
Yeah, so it's a neighborhood commercial, so it's a lower intense commercial type zone. If you're interested in what uses are permitted, they're available in the ordinance. The military exclusion zone, we have not fully vetted out exactly what that's going to entail, only to the fact that we've had a couple meetings with the county and reps from Earl, and that they are looking and evaluating, what's transpiring along its borders, not just here, but Colts Neck and Tinton Falls, etc. And so we implemented a recommendation to evaluate it. There is no specific recommendation on what exactly that would entail. If that process moves forward, it would be done so at the governing body throughout, through the course of an ordinance. I also don't agree with your characterization of self-storage. And while yes, it's in a box, it is probably the lowest traffic generator you could possibly have as an economic development land use classification. So I don't agree that allowing for self-storage would be detrimental in any way. In fact, that the evidence and the information, if you check traffic studies on existing self-storage facilities, it just doesn't bear that out. So with that being said, I still stand behind the recommendations in the plan. I have taken notes on some of the details that you would like to see as we prepare ordinances should this move forward. But you know, I don't agree with the assertion that the proposal is inappropriate.
Thank you, Ms. Beam.
Okay, so is that the totality of your response, Jen?
It is.
Okay, Matt, do you have anything to add?
No, not at this time.
Okay, so Mr. Chairman and members of the board, you have heard a request that the board carry the consideration of the master plan to a future date to allow counsel and her clients to hire a professional planner to place testimony on the record. Law does not require it, doesn't prohibit it, so that would be a decision for the board to make.
And Mr. Cucchiaro, if I could add, I'm sure there are other people here, you know,
Well, you can't
waiting to
speak for other
testify.
people. You can only speak for yourself and your clients.
right, but who are waiting here to testify. So, you know, I wouldn't want to cut anyone else off.
Oh, yeah, we're not, I appreciate that, it's not Tommy. We're gonna hear all public comment today.
Good.
At the moment, your hand was the only one that was up, though. Eileen, are there any other hands that were
Oh,
up?
we got 3 of them.
3 of them now? Okay, so let's move on and defer that decision. So
Thank
let's
you.
move on to the
Thank
next.
you. Have a good night.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
The next one is Adam Fiella.
Okay, Mr. Fiala, if you want to place your appearance on the record and give us your client.
Good evening. Do you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
So at least we did.
Hi, I just want to make sure you guys can hear me.
Yeah, we can hear
We
you, Adam.
can.
Do we have to see him, Mr. Cucchiaro?
He's not
Please, Dan.
testifying, so
Okay,
there's not a requirement, but if he has witnesses he wants to present, they need to be on camera.
got it, thank you.
So I had a couple questions for Ms. Beam, and then I had 2 witnesses to call,
Okay, go
if
ahead.
that's okay, Ron.
Yeah, go ahead.
All right, so Adam Fiella from Sills, Cummins and Gross. We represent Monmouth Commerce Center LLC in relation to Block 5, Lots 2 and 3. And that property is part of Proposal 21 to be moved from the SED zone to the SE. Sorry, I have a lot of lag on mine. Am I able to stop the video? I think that might help.
You're not testifying, so you're not required to be on camera. So
Okay, thank you.
You can.
All right, I hope that helps. I'll start over. Adam Fiala from Sills, Cummins and Gross. We represent Monmouth Commerce LLC in connection with Block 5, Lots 2 and 3. Those properties or those lots, that property is recommended as part of Proposal 21 to be moved from the SED zone to the SED2 zone. So, Ms. Beam, I just have a few questions before we call our witnesses. I believe that you had stated during your presentation on the land use element that there were minor tweaks from the 2019 recommendations, but mostly kept the recommendations, correct?
Jen, you're muted.
Sorry, we did, yes.
Thank you. So I was wondering why the land use recommendations includes a line that says a key change in circumstances has been the recent social, economic, and environmental impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic beginning in early 2020. So I'm wondering why or how the pandemic affected the land use recommendations.
Well, number one, as you're, I'm sure, intimately aware, the reliance upon internet shopping versus brick and mortar shopping and the transition of the retail market is one very critical component of the aftermath of the pandemic. And that's one of, that people are working more from home, as opposed to going into the office every day, changing the demands of an office market. So there are definitely, can you not agree that there are definitely changes in the world today as a
Well,
result?
you're
of the
not,
pandemic?
Jen, you're answering the question. You're not asking Adam questions.
So yeah, so that's my answer.
Thank you. I believe that you stated the roadway network in certain areas was not designed for truck traffic, and that was part of the recommendation, or it sounded like the main reason for why warehouse was not was recommended to no longer be permitted in certain areas. Is that accurate for the SED to SED2 zone changes?
Well, I think you would have to marry that with the comments that were made with respect to the circulation element related to Arnold Boulevard in consultation with, reps from the town. Right-of-way acquisition is unlikely due to past development projects and high cost to acquire land from private owners and the geometry of the roadway. And this is in consultation with township staff, and the town is evaluating potential weight restrictions on this road and others as you head east. So that all led into the evaluation, which is why we married the two elements together to recommend changes to the zoning area as a zoning district in this area.
So I have two follow-up questions on that. One, it seems like, and I don't want to oversimplify your response, but it seemed like a lot of that was related to truck traffic specifically. Is that fair to say? They all kind of tie into, the circulation plan, the roadway network, and certain roads. And it sounds like it relates to truck traffic. Is that fair?
I mean, I think it's part of it. It's not all of it. I mean, I think that it kind of ties into the other evaluations that we made with respect to having limited opportunity to acquire right-of-way and to be cognizant of development patterns in those areas. It's not exclusive to Arnold, but it is definitely one of the roads that we evaluated for trucks and other larger vehicles with respect to, how it would impact the road network and the limited ability to acquire additional right-of-way.
Did you look into the differentiation of the different uses that are still being left permitted and the uses that, like warehouse, that is no longer permitted, and their differences in truck traffic and other types of traffic?
Did we look at what uses would be non-conforming? Is that your question?
No, I'm asking if you looked at the uses that are staying as permitted uses in the SED zone and compare them in terms of those impacts that you just cited, specifically truck traffic and impacts on roads, compared to warehousing, which was recommended to not be permitted anymore.
We didn't do specific traffic studies on each individual permitted use that would remain in the zone.
Okay, so was there a reason why warehousing specifically was excluded or recommended to not be permitted, whereas other uses were recommended to stay as permitted?
I think I answered that multiple times already. Limited ability to acquire right-of-way, geometry of the road, recommendations to discourage trucks and large vehicles. I mean, I think it's the same answer as we had for the prior questions.
Okay, I was trying to ask it in a different way because I wasn't asking for that specific answer. I wasn't trying to make you repeat the same thing, so I apologize there. I was wondering if you looked at those specific impacts on all of the uses that are were permitted and are the uses that are continuing to be permitted.
So as I said, I did not do an individual traffic study on all the permitted uses that would remain in the zone.
Okay, thank you. And also you mentioned the circulation plan element, and I'm sorry, do you mind repeating which road you were just citing before?
Arnold.
As that affects proposal 21?
Arnold.
Arnold Boulevard.
Arnold Boulevard, okay. And did you look at Randolph Road? Because I don't think I saw that in the circulation plan.
We didn't specifically do counts or an evaluation on that road in particular, but Arnold Road, as you know, is farther to the east and Randolph feeds into Arnold.
And if the trucks stay on Randolph Road but don't go towards Arnold, would that change your evaluation on the recommendation of the zoning change?
Probably not.
Even if Randolph Road was not looked at in the circulation plan and wasn't deemed to have those same issues as Arnold Boulevard does?
I'm not saying they weren't deemed to have them. I'm just saying it wasn't one of the specific roads that were called out to be evaluated in depth.
Well, I'm not saying they do or don't have them, but I'm saying that the circulation plan, I think it's fair to say, does not state that that road has those issues. Is that correct? If it's not shown on the circulation plan, we can't assume it has those issues. Is that fair?
I don't know if it's fair to assume they don't have the issues. What it's fair to say is that that road wasn't specifically evaluated as part of the in-depth look at this time.
Okay, thank you. So those are all my questions for Ms. Beam. Thank you, Ms. Beam. My first witness is Justin Taylor, if he can be brought in.
Okay, just let me know when he's in and on camera.
Yep.
I should be
All
there
right.
now, Ron. Can you see
All
me?
right, I see it. Do you swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give this board is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Please state and spell your name for the record.
Justin Taylor, Taylor.
Okay, Adam, if you can just qualify Mr. Taylor. Yes, thank you, Ron. Mr. Taylor, can you state your licensing and your background and education and confirm that your licensing is current?
Sure. I hold a bachelor's in engineering from the University of Delaware. I'm a licensed engineer in the state of New Jersey, as well as Pennsylvania, Delaware, and Texas. I'm also a certified professional traffic operations engineer by the Institute of Transportation Engineers. We're practicing traffic planning for traffic engineering for a little over 20 years now, and have testified at hundreds of boards throughout the state of New Jersey, including this board in the past.
Thank you. We'll accept your credentials, Mr. Taylor.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Taylor, just before you get started, just one quick question I have for you, and certainly we are aware of each other from many different municipalities. Have you ever worked for a municipality on a master plan?
I have. It's probably been 15 years when I was with Shortapama, and we were doing Stafford, we were doing other municipalities. So I did participate in circulation elements way in my distant past.
Okay. All right. That's all I have. Okay, go ahead.
Thank you. So, Mr. Taylor, have you reviewed the draft land use element and circulation plan elements?
Yes, I have.
And have you been here for this presentation that Ms. Beam made and the responses that she has had to the questions so far today?
Yes, I've been here all evening.
Great, thank you. Have you compared the uses that are still allowed to be permitted in the SED zone or SED2 zone to warehousing use, which is no longer being permitted, in terms of traffic generation and truck traffic generation?
Yeah, we took a quick look at some of the other uses that would remain permitted uses within the SED2 zone, inclusive of manufacturing, general office, medical office, and compared them to the trip generation associated with a standard warehouse type of use. And what you find is that from an ITE perspective, the various uses, manufacturing, office, medical office, all generate traffic at a much higher rate than warehouse would per square foot. Sometimes as much as 10 times the amount of traffic that's associated with a warehouse, if you were to compare it to say medical office use per square foot. So we looked at that, and so based on that, I think that from a trip generation perspective, the warehouse use in it of itself is not the big generator that some of these other permitted uses actually would be. We also took a quick look at truck generation because that's been a topic of this conversation. And I will gladly admit that your warehouse is going to generate more truck traffic than, say, a general office building. You're going to get your FedEx guys and those sort of things in the general office. But when you start looking at manufacturing, the necessity of bringing goods in as raw materials and then shipping out the goods as finished materials in a manufacturing use, you actually find that manufacturing uses generate truck traffic at a pretty similar rate that general warehousing does. So to categorize the fact that the elimination of the warehouse is going to reduce the traffic in the SED2 zone or reduce the truck traffic, I just don't agree with.
Thank you, Mr. Taylor. And in terms of truck routes, obviously this is a master plan review, so it's more general, not individual applications. But you've looked at, as I believe this board is well aware, in terms of a specific application, truck routes for this subject property. Is it your opinion that trucks can go from this area that's being rezoned and not use Arnold Boulevard to go back? I think that's west on Randolph Road when they leave the site and come in from that direction as well?
Yes, that's correct. County Route 547.
Just before we get the answer to that, when you're talking about the property, you're talking about the property that Monmouth Commerce sits on specifically?
Yes, so that's block 5, lots 2 and 3. I know that this is a general overview, so but when you look at the properties in proposal 21, they are all situated between, I would guess that's Brook Road.
Well, I guess my only question was whether the testimony we were hearing was limited to the Monmouth Commerce property or whether it was more broad than that.
Well, I'll defer to Justin because he has reviewed the land use element. So thank you for that clarification, Ron, and I'll defer to Justin on his testimony because he has seen what is on the last page of the land use element, exactly where proposal 21 is.
Sure, I think the conclusion can be drawn for all of the properties located within the proposal 21 area. They essentially front along Randolph Road, and the primary travel route for the trucks that would be associated with the warehouse use here would be to route County Route 547 and that traveling then to Route 195. So I don't believe that the traffic, I understand that there are traffic issues at Arnold Avenue, but I don't think the prevailing route for the trucks that would be associated with this area would be towards Arnold Avenue. They'd be more oriented towards the county major collector roadway and the interstate roadway network.
Thank you, Mr. Taylor. So is it your opinion that the concerns that were raised by Ms. Beam that led to these changes are not actually being affected by the changes that are being implemented? In other words, the proposal to change this from SED to SED2 and get rid of warehousing as a permitted use doesn't actually go to the issues that were used to justify that change from a traffic standpoint.
I would say from a traffic standpoint, the traffic associated with the warehouse use would be similar or less than some of the other permitted uses within the SED2 zone.
And it wouldn't affect, this area shouldn't really affect Arnold Boulevard because there is an alternative route that you think is the primary route, actually, not going towards Arnold Boulevard. Is that fair to say?
That's correct.
Thank you. So that concludes my questions for this witness. We do have another witness, Ron.
Okay, that's fine, but Mr. Taylor, you do need to hang around in case the board members or anybody else from the public has any questions, but we can move on to your next witness.
Absolutely. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And our next witness is Kate Keller, if she can be admitted in here.
Ron, I don't know if it's appropriate, but I got a quick question because I'm hearing two things. One, I heard the attorney Adam say that warehouses are prohibited. These are just recommendations, so that's not an accurate statement. These are, until the governing body takes action, these are just recommendations. And my second question is, they're talking about vehicles, that the vehicles would be the same counts based on the uses. But are they talking about specific vehicles? Are we talking about tractor trailers and trucks that are associated with warehousing versus an
So-
office space that has vehicle,
What I would recommend is let's let the next witness go. That's a very relevant question, but let's let both the witnesses go. Then we can ask the questions and then whoever is the right expert can answer them.
Thank you, Ron, but I think I can just answer that very quickly if you don't mind. Mr. Nicastro.
Well, I think it was a question towards a
Well,
professional, not towards you.
I know, but it was, I mean, if we want, Mr. Taylor is right on that he can answer that question.
All right,
because
then,
that-
Mr. Taylor, why don't you answer the question? But you
And I just want
gotta,
to say, Mr. Nicastro is right. It is recommendations to prohibit warehousing. So I apologize if I'm jumping back and forth and being a little bit quick with my words. But it is a recommendation to prohibit warehousing. And so I want to emphasize that, yes, I know that adopting this would not automatically prohibit it, but the reality is it would recommend to the Township Council to prohibit that use. So I think we should think about it as warehousing in, not immediately, but would be in turn or in line being prohibited if these recommendations get adopted. That's what I meant when I said those.
okay. I would just say, Mr. Nicastro, there's two processes. One is this one where, and I don't want to diminish the importance of the master plan. It is a important bedrock policy document that influences and guides future zoning ordinances. However, as Mr. Fayez said, it doesn't in and of itself modify anything. But presumably when ordinances are being introduced, there's going to be a public hearing at the governing body where, all these issues can be raised again.
So
and I agree. And sitting on the governing body for the past 8 years, it's just an assumption to assume that because something's in the master plan, governing bodies are going to adopt it. So I've sat on a governing body and there's have been recommendations that governing body hasn't taken. So it's just an assumption, but I'll continue.
So, well, I think
Understood.
someone was going to answer the question more fully. I think.
Mr. Taylor, can you clarify the traffic generation that you were discussing in terms of overall traffic for the different uses, but then also in terms of specifically individual vehicle types such as tractor trailers?
Sure. So the comparison that I'm making is first and foremost total traffic, total trip generation, right? When you're talking about passenger vehicles and trucks as a whole, you're talking about, say, a general office generating 4 times, almost 5 times the amount of traffic that a warehouse would per square foot. Trying to keep this general and applying to all the lots within that proposal 21, I ran a little thought exercise of, say, 100,000 square feet. It was 100,000 square feet of warehouse, 100,000 square feet of office, 100,000 square feet of manufacturing, and took a look at those comparisons. And that's where I'm drawing those numbers. But if you want to drill down a little bit more into that, from an ITE perspective, if you were to look at manufacturing, which is land use code 140, it would say that for 100,000 square feet, you're going to generate 58 daily trucks, okay? For the same 100,000 square feet of warehouse or land use code 150, you would generate 53 daily trucks. So while their comparison to, say, an office building is not going to have the large tractor trailers, there are other land uses that are still proposed to remain within the SED2 zone that's going to generate similar truck traffic and actual higher total daily traffic than the proposed warehouse or the warehouse use.
Does that answer your question, Mr. Nicastro?
I was seeking specifically trucks versus vehicles, and what uses are you comparing the warehouses to that you're saying that the trucks, other than manufacturing, because manufacturing and warehousing is basically two of the same or one of the same.
But to be
Except-
fair, manufacturing is staying permitted in the recommendations, but warehousing is not. So I appreciate you saying they're practically the same, because we're wondering the same reason why warehousing would be.
No, the same as vehicles.
Yes,
The uses
correct.
could be different. So what I want to know is just, when you're comparing the vehicles, are you comparing trucks versus cars?
I compared both from a truck perspective and from a total trip generation perspective.
Okay.
Your statement as to trip generation and what you found in the ITE, that was comparing, whatever it was, WB40s to WB40s, and not WB40s to a passenger car that an employee was coming in with?
I know an apples to apples comparison of those 58 and 53 that I quoted are for heavy vehicle percentages, tractor trailers. If you were to talk about total trip generation, right? For that same 100,000 square foot thought exercise, the warehouse is going to generate 196 total daily trips. Manufacturing, the same 100,000 would be 579, or 2.5 times that. General office at 100,000 square feet would generate 1,160 trips. So 5 times what the warehouse would. So I'm understanding that out of that office component, a lot more of them are passenger vehicles. From a manufacturing perspective, you're going to have the same truck traffic you would from a warehouse use.
Thank you. So I think at this time, I'd like to call our second witness, Ms. Kate Keller.
Okay, do you swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give this board is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
Please state and spell your name for the record.
Hi, good evening, Chairman, members of the board. My name is Kate Keller. Last name is Keller.
Okay, if you'd like to qualify, Ms. Keller.
Thank you. Ms. Keller, can you describe for the board your background, education and licenses, and confirm your licenses are current?
Sure. I'm a principal with the firm of Phillips Price Greigel Laney Hughes LLC based in Hoboken, New Jersey. I've been with the company for about 10 years serving as a professional planner. I'm currently licensed in the state of New Jersey and also hold certification from the American Institute of Certified Planners. I have undergraduate and master's degrees in urban studies and planning from the University of Pennsylvania. And I have, in addition to being qualified at about 50 plus boards across the state, I do serve a number of municipal clients in New Jersey and especially in Monmouth County as well.
Great, thank you. We'll accept your credentials.
Thank you, Chairman. I appreciate it.
Ms. Keller, did you review the land use element and the circulation plan element?
Yes, I did.
And were you here and present for the presentation that Ms. Beam put on and the questions and answers that have been and comments that have been made so far tonight?
Yes, I have been here for the whole presentation tonight.
Thank you. Can you discuss specifically looking at proposal 21, the change from SED to SED2 zone, and the recommendation to prohibit warehousing use from a planning perspective in your view, and specifically if there are any internal inconsistencies with that recommendation?
Sure. Thank you, Adam. I don't want to reiterate a lot of the excellent discussion and guidance that's been provided tonight by your board attorney and your board planner, but I do just want to, just remind everybody just the purpose of the master plan and what its requirements are. So, at its core, the municipal master plan is required to contain a statement of objectives, principles, assumptions, and policies upon which the proposals in the plan are to be based. And further, the land use plan in particular is required to take these assumptions and objectives into account and the relationship to same when the policies are given. So with regards to specifically proposal 21, but in general, many of the changes that are proposed to the SED districts, there's a number of specific policies recommendations that are given in the master plan that range from specifically to proposal 21 is the change of zoning that would eliminate warehouse uses. But in my opinion, looking through this plan, these policy directives are not really directly supported by basis or rationale. And I think that this relates to both the exclusion of warehouse and distribution uses as the exception of other uses of similar intensities within the SED2 zone, and also the changes in locations and the rezoning changes in general for which zones are, which existing SED zones would be changed. So again, proposal 21 in particular takes the existing SED district and proposes to move this area along both sides of Randolph Road, or along Randolph Road to the, apologies, into the new SED2 zone. So I think that these recommendations, this is obviously a document that has had a lot of work go into it, and it contains a lot of information that covers this large, diverse township. But I think that in this case, in my opinion, the threshold where assumptions and policies are set forth for these changes is not specifically met. For example, Mr. Fiala in his introduction mentioned the description on page 1 of this plan that relates to circumstances related to COVID. This is set forth just as a statement that circumstances have changed, but as a casual reader of this plan, there isn't really a distinction granted that nothing's enumerated as to what those changes are and what potential impacts they might have on land use. So essentially, in my opinion, no clear nexus is really drawn here. Next, this goes back to the testimony of Mr. Taylor that you just heard, which is that in both the land use plan and in the circulation plan, terms like high intensity and high density are used in several locations throughout the plan and have also been discussed tonight. But I think that there isn't really a qualification given in any kind of rationale or kind of threshold for what qualifies as a high intensity use. Just as an example, and this has been discussed ad nauseum tonight, but 2 of the circulation recommendations relate to removing high intensity uses where the roads can't support that. But at the same time, this definition of high density or high intensity is never really expanded upon. Ms. Beam mentioned earlier that this consideration was given that does include some trucks, but generally traffic in total. But yet warehousing and distribution is the only use that's specifically eliminated in these SED2 districts. And again, this is an area along Randolph Road in particular, where it's not specifically mentioned in the circulation plan as someplace where the roads can't support it. And I think that the connection to, I'm sorry, the connecting road, it's adjacent to it, but it's not the actual road itself, and it's not the road that runs through this proposal 21 area. So, whether Arnold Boulevard can or cannot support quote unquote high intensity uses is not specifically relevant, and it is not explained as how it's relevant to the proposed change for area 21. And again, I'm not going to reiterate what Mr. Taylor went through, but high intensity is without being further explained, that is, as you read this ordinance, it seems like that would not apply to things like offices, medical centers, assembly and packaging plants, many types of manufacturing uses, and even things like a multi-purpose recreation and sports complex, which is specifically permitted. And while, that's not something that necessarily creates truck traffic, the last item in particular, that's something that can have a major effect on residential areas. But that's not considered to be a high intensity use as far as this goes. And just finally, I just wanted to bring this back to the whole idea of goals and objectives that guide the master plan, which is that there are not new goals and objectives that are set forth in this plan, but the most recent master plan update and reexamination in 2019 did reaffirm a number of goals that were related to both economic development and in particular this area of the subject property. Or by the subject property, I again mean both the site of Monmouth Commerce Center, but in larger, particularly the proposal 21 area. And this is to quote the 2019 reexamination report, which indicates that a goal that continues is to encourage the redevelopment or revitalization of vacant or underutilized properties. And this is when, and the addition to this goal at that time was to note that there had been several applications for light industrial development in the vicinity of Randolph Road. And that in order for the township's economic base to be maintained, as well as the goal of preserving open space, this type of new commercial development, i.e. the revitalization of underutilized properties, should be promoted in areas that are already served by adequate infrastructure. And that, qualifies in this location based on just how this goal reads. So I think that there is not, these assumptions are assumed to carry through in this new master plan amendment. And I think that there is some contradictions between the stated goals and what previously stated goals and what's included in this plan. So, this is, these are changes that affect many of the parcels that are in the SED2, or excuse me, the existing SED district. But in particular, I think that there is some disconnect between the recommendations made in here and the existing conditions and the policies that are set forth elsewhere in the plan, particularly related to proposal 21.
Thank you, Ms. Keller. And I do have one follow-up question. Are you aware of existing warehouses in this proposal 21 area, such as the Arnold Boulevard property?
Yes.
So
Thank you.
Is it fair to say that the character of this proposal 21 area is industrial and has warehouses in it existing?
Yes, that's the case. And I would also note that this recommendation for a zoning change does not make any kind of enumeration for what would happen to those existing uses, which would effectively become pre-existing non-conforming uses that could not expand or do anything to updates to their property without going to the zoning board of adjustment.
Thank you. So that's all we have from our witnesses. I did want to have one just very brief statement at the end, Ron, but I think I don't know if the board wants to ask the questions for the witnesses first.
Mr. Chairman, if the board has any questions, now would be the time. If not, it would be appropriate to allow council to provide some closing statements.
Thank you. Does anybody on the board have any comments or questions for witness? Seeing none, thank you. Counselor?
So, thank you. I'll make this very brief. I think our two witnesses were excellent and made the points that I want to reiterate is that we do not believe there is a justification for a recommendation to prohibit warehousing in this proposal 21 area and in the change from SED to SED2. We don't think that there is any justification legally, planning, traffic-wise to prohibit warehousing here. And so we recommend that the board does not make that recommendation and ultimately not make that recommendation and at a minimum to re-look at this land use element plan and to reconsider what's in there. But we do hope that the board rejects that recommendation to prohibit warehouses in this proposal 21 area. So thank you everybody for your time.
Thank you. Have a good night. Okay.
Okay, Eileen, do we have anybody else?
Yes, you do. Hold on one second. Give me 1 second. I have Joan Osborne coming in.
Ms. Osborne, are you appearing as a member of the public? Do you have clients, or how would you like to be recognized tonight?
I'm as a member of the public.
Okay. Do
Local
you
resident.
swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give this board is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Please
Can
state
you
and spell
raise,
your.
excuse me, can you raise your volume? We can hardly hear you. Or speak up. Thank you.
Do my best. Is that better?
Okay, please state and spell your name and give us your address.
Joan Osborne, Osborne, 28 Bronya, Howell, New Jersey.
Okay, go ahead.
I had a couple questions of Jennifer. I apologize. I've been multitasking, working while I was listening. And I think what I heard was that the areas that were specifically studied for the circulation plan were developed as a result of a survey sent out to the public to get input on where there are problem areas. And is that accurate? Is that the reason you didn't get a comment about Randolph Road and that's why that wasn't looked at?
So it wasn't a survey that we sent out. It was a survey that was put on the website and was left up on the website for a month. And people can go into the survey, click on areas that they wanted. It's not to say that nobody identified Randolph Road. However, it was not, we were only tasked with looking at 10 roads. We actually looked at 12. And Randolph Road was not in the top 10. And in fact, if we actually took the top 10, half the roads that we did study wouldn't have been studied because it was roads that we didn't have jurisdiction over.
Okay, but Randolph Road is a road we have jurisdiction over, and despite it's been a subject of numerous development applications that had pretty strong oppositions in the last couple of years based on issues of traffic. So I would hope if the board does agree with Ms. Hatami's request that the hearing be continued so she can present witnesses, that you take that opportunity to revisit looking at that because it has been a big issue for this area of the town. And I would just like to address Mr. Taylor's and the attorney's questions about whether any traffic studies were done. And you had indicated not specifically, but did you evaluate or do you have knowledge of the traffic studies that have been associated with and submitted as part of recent applications in that area, indicating what the levels of traffic are?
So yes, I'm aware that traffic studies have been completed, but as I stated, the roadway networks that were studied were the 12 that received the most input between township officials, namely engineering staff, as well as the top, we looked at like the top 15 roads that came out of the survey, which was designed to solicit and input from the public, and Randolph Road was not in the top 12. And so we didn't delve deeper. Am I aware of them? Yes, but it wasn't, those roadways were not studied because they were not requested to be studied.
Well, again, I would ask that if you are given the opportunity to revisit that you look at those, to the extent that the public had an opportunity to participate. I appreciate that, but we also rely on the judgment of our professionals who are much more involved in what's going on in the town. So I would like to see that looked at. With regard to the testimony about the medical use building that would generate more traffic than what you are proposing be restricted for Randolph Road area, have more traffic there, but there's no indication, and it's kind of a straw man that, well, if you build something that nobody's ever proposed there, and there is no need for, because we were amply supported by hospitals in the area, and given the size of what Monmouth Commerce Center is being proposed at, really the only comparable size facility would be a hospital. So that argument that we could have more intensive development and more intensive traffic generated is really, there's no merit to it.
So I just want to,
it's never gonna.
I understand where you're coming from, and I don't disagree. I just want to be very clear. This is not a hearing on Monmouth Commerce. And so
No, I understand.
right. So I understand that, but this is a more global evaluation of the township as a whole, and it was not a specific evaluation of Monmouth Commerce and the impact that that prospective development would have.
Right, but the argument is being used to argue that you shouldn't prohibit warehouse use there because there could be more intensive use that is being permitted, and that's just not accurate. One of the things I think that we should be considering with regard to the land use element and the rezoning is including language such as Ms. Hatami had recommended is for certain uses reducing the amount of coverage and, perhaps tying that to the size of a parcel. If you have 50 acres, you can't cover it with a 50-acre building. Maybe you can cover it with 25 acres, but especially if it's taking down trees, that we don't allow clear cutting of an entire parcel and covering it completely with the building. That if you have 1 acre, you can cover 90% of it. If you have 20 acres, you can cover 60% of it, something like that. I had questions about what you're talking about with regard to making the house of worship or school definitions more inclusive. Would that mean that it would be much easier to be classified as a house of worship and you wouldn't have any parking requirements?
What it means is that we took into account federal and state case law, or the Arlupa statute itself, and tried to make it, and I don't think I used the word inclusive, but we tried to make it consistent with what the case law is so that it would not be vulnerable to judicial challenge as discriminating against certain types of schools versus other schools.
So did the changes incorporate houses of worship in more zones than are currently included in?
I would defer to Jen. I don't think we expanded that.
No,
it was just a matter of definition of where they are currently permitted. Right, Jen?
Yes.
Yeah.
With regard to proposal number 6, where you're recommending that what is currently zoned as ARE6 become, I think you said HD highway development. I would be against, I would ask for that to be looked at again, because generally we're not looking to make a more intensive use in areas that were in the past and people purchased with the idea that they're going to be in a residential area. And I had questions about how putting weight limits on roads is actually going to work with regard to existing development that might require trucks that are of a certain weight to service that use versus things that have been approved and not built yet, and versus things that are pending. How would weight restrictions affect such development applications and uses?
So we're not specifically making what those recommendations are. The recommendation is to evaluate the potential to do that. So obviously, when that occurs, there will be an evaluation on how to address it based upon the specific area. But again, this is not the ordinance. These are just recommendations that go back towards the governing body. And all of these things, which I don't disagree with some of what you have said, are appropriate more for the ordinance with respect to the specifics on, specific coverage, specific lot area, these weight limit issues. These are recommendations in general, and that they would have to be vetted out in an ordinance form before they could be brought forward to the governing body, if the governing body entertains the recommendation at all.
Okay. And with regard to proposal number 21, again, Randolph Road, you indicated that you wanted to change it. You're recommending a change to a lighter industrial use. Was it considered, for an even lighter use, given that there's a class 1 waterway directly in that area?
No.
And why not?
Because there is an existing development pattern in that area currently. And while I don't disagree with the testimony, while I do disagree with the testimony provided in that we're going to create all this nonconformity, there's one warehouse in that area that perhaps would be considered nonconforming depending upon what is being done inside the building. not a whole host of it, but you do have some other industrial uses that exist there. And so the intention is not to create such nonconformity. We did take a look at that. We did take a look at that wholeheartedly. And while, yes, there is a class 1 waterway, there are extensive buffering and DEP restrictions and requirements that any development in that area would have to comply with. And so, no, that was not taken into consideration.
Okay, well, given, that it's a really nice property that had a lot of trees before a lot of the test pits were dug recently, I would request that you look again at the ERI that was done and adopted last year with some of those recommendations for areas such as that, which that actually falls in within the state's classification of a high value environmental resource.
Well, when you say look at it again, we adopted it. It's in our master plan, correct,
No,
Jen?
Yeah, it's part of the conservation element.
I'm saying look at the conservation element again with regard to that recommendation for that particular area.
I'm very familiar with it, and I did take into consideration what was prepared, and I stand by the recommendation.
Okay, well, the Environmental Commission worked very hard on that for a couple of years, and we have very few waterways that are not polluted within our township that are polluted to a dangerous level. This one's a class 1 one, and I think that we should do all we can to protect it. That's all I have. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Osborne. Have a good night.
You too.
Anyone else, Eileen?
There is no one with their hand raised right now.
Okay, so Mr. Chairman, you want to just give it a minute or two and then we can close public?
Yep.
I thought I did. I have 2 other hands raised.
Okay.
One is on the phone, so I have no idea who it is. No, I broke both in by mistake.
All right, let's start with the one that's not on the, or the individual who's not on the phone.
All right. That's AJ.
Okay, sir, can you turn your camera on?
I believe it's on.
We're promoting him to a panelist. That should allow him to.
Oh, okay, okay.
He's in, Matt.
He's here, but
He's not. He's stuck on the outside.
I don't know what I did.
He's coming in now. You allowed him to talk.
Oh.
I'm trying to get my video to work.
Okay. Yep, I think we see you now.
Yep.
Okay, so let me swear you in first, sir. Do you swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give this board is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
Please state and spell your name and give us your address.
My name is Abraham Chasnoff. I live at 20 West Baccio Lane in Howell.
Okay,
I'm
go ahead,
actually,
sir.
I'm joining up because I'm the vice chairman of the Equestria Civics Issues Committee. And I know that the chairman has been trying to get on and apparently he can't. So I'm his backup.
So you're here representing the Civics Committee or yourself?
We're representing the community of Equestria. We are residents of Equestria. We're speaking up on our own behalf.
Okay.
But representing the community as best we can.
You speaking on, we understand you're speaking on your own behalf. You can go ahead, sir.
Okay. Mr. Doherty had prepared a statement, and I'm here to present it to you.
Well, with regard to Mr. Doherty, if you agree with the statement,
I
just
do.
read it and we'll take it as your statement.
Okay, that'll be fine.
Okay.
Equestria has about 24 homes which are backing onto the proposal of 18, which is to make it an SE2 overlay of the ARE6 unit on Yellowbrook Road. This area was created, I guess, in 1980 or in that area. And there are now many residential areas in that zone. And there are a few companies that are non-conforming that also occupy space in that area. We're concerned that the SED2 overlay will change the quality of that area. And we suggest that the plan be removed. In this regard, we're joining with the language of Ms. Hatani, who spoke earlier today. And we hope that you will give consideration to her thought to have an adjournment so that she can present more information to you. But we object to it, to the change that this will bring to the area of the Equestria residents in that area as well. And that's basically my statement.
Okay, thank you, sir.
You're welcome. Thank you.
And Eileen, the next, that's the 932 area code number is the other one?
Yes.
So if that individual could unmute themselves.
You have to press *6 to unmute
Oh,
yourself.
look, they did it.
Okay, go ahead.
Are you able to activate the camera on your phone?
No.
Okay. Mr. Chair, this is up to you. The regulations for the meetings require anyone who's going to testify to be on camera. The board could proceed at some, not a lot of risk, but some risk, and allow this participation without the camera.
I guess we got to find out whether he's proposing to provide testimony, right?
He's a member of the public and he's going to say something. So the answer is yes, he's going to.
Okay. I don't think we want to start a precedence of changing the rules and regulations the state of New Jersey put in place.
Well, then let's see if it's questions or statements. Sir, can you give us your name and spell it?
Get any audio.
To the participant on the phone, can you please give us your name and address? Yes.
Okay, we want to give them a minute or her to get call back.
We're gonna try and bring them into the meeting a different way. Just 1 second.
Okay.
Well, you should be ready to talk now.
We're hearing, yeah, so now.
It doesn't even.
Phone number ending in 9941. Can you hear us? Oh, he's muted now. Phone number ending in 9941. Can you hear us?
It looks like too many numbers for a phone number.
Yeah, it doesn't even look like a real phone number. I would agree, Jen.
Hello?
Hello?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Go ahead.
If you could give us your name, sir, spell it, and give us your address.
I think I was just recognized. I'm John Doherty. Abe Chapman.
Mr. Doherty, your fellow board member for the Civic Association read your statement into the record.
I heard.
So if that's okay, we'll recognize that, you know, you agree with that statement, and that statement can be attributed to you as well.
Okay,
Okay, thank you, Mr. Doherty.
you're welcome.
Okay.
We're gonna move him out.
Anyone else, Eileen?
There is no one else with their hand raised.
Okay, so Mr. Chairman, if you
Wait.
want, you can close the public.
I'm seeing
Hold
one.
on. Hold on, somebody did raise their hand.
Is it Mr. Parisi?
Yes, it is.
Okay, Mr. Parisi, if you could, you have your camera activated?
I do. I'm just
Okay.
driving. I'm just parking right now. Hold on one second.
Sure.
Okay. All right. Yeah, I'm here. Can you see and hear me?
Yes, we can. Do you swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give this board is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
Please state and spell your name and give us your address.
Sure. My name is Mark Parisi. Last name Parisi, 2 Castle Court.
Okay, go ahead, Mr. Parisi.
All right. I just want to thank everybody this evening for the thorough presentation. There's been a lot of interesting comments and discussion. I know that it was covered earlier about the building coverage. I had a question. Just historically, has the SED zone ever had a maximum building coverage limitation?
I could tell you right now, it does not. I don't know if it ever has. I haven't looked into the bulk standards back from the 60s and 70s recently.
Okay, I know it has a maximum impervious coverage of 70%, but I don't believe there is a building coverage limitation, which kind of, it has been, an issue on prior applications as far as the intensity of the proposed project. I guess I would ask that the board consider maybe making some recommendations for there being a building coverage limitation in the industrial zones.
Mr. Parisi, if I might, we do make a general recommendation to evaluate the bulk standards in all the zones, and that is on my list of one of those. So the specifics, I don't have any of the specifics as of right now, but this is something that we've been talking about, and there's a couple of residential zones that don't have building coverage requirements either. So it is definitely one of the things that recommendation encompasses. I totally agree with you.
Not only bulk standards, but also conditional uses, which we can include that.
Exactly.
And then I just want to be clear, Jen, so to make sure I understand it. When you're saying the overall bulk standards, it would include what Mr. Parisi is talking about, but not be limited to that. We'd be talking about setbacks and height and buffer requirements and, things like that as well, right?
Yes.
All right.
Well, do you think that it would be useful for the governing body to have some guidance regarding what those recommendations may be? Because if they see, consider reevaluating this or that, and there's no specified, percentages and data.
Well, I would say, Mr. Parisi, that the danger, I don't want to say danger, but the flip side to that is that when a master plan gets overly specific, it limits the governing body in a way that, they lack the flexibility to put those specific parameters in, because it then deviates from what's in the master plan. And, there's a whole process that has to be followed because you're doing something that's not in the master plan. So with a general recommendation, like Jen's talking about, it allows the governing body to impose those standards, but it also retains the maximum flexibility to find specific bulk requirements that may differ, in different areas. So the argument goes both ways. You could be very specific, and then, you wind up with an ordinance that may be that specific, or you may wind up with no ordinance because the governing body wanted to do something somewhat different, versus having maximum flexibility where they have the power and the opportunity to look at specific areas and, maybe have different standards or standards that they think are more appropriate, based upon the geography or the topography of certain portions of the municipality.
I understand what you're saying. I mean, the planning board has the land use professionals, so I would think that at the end of the day, the governing body elected officials rely upon the professional recommendations and expertise of the land use professionals. But I hear what you're saying.
Okay.
The other thing that I wanted to address was there was mention of the woodlands management and tree ordinances, and this is something a little bit near and dear to my heart because I was on Shade Tree, and Mr. Kuchera, we talked about this 2 years ago, and I know that there was a provision in the land use element regarding defining clear cutting on residential lots. I would recommend that the land use element include some type of recommendations about revising tree ordinances on non-residential lots, and like you were talking about, the bulk variances about, maybe increasing some type of wooded buffers on particular non-residential development to try to preserve existing, wooded areas, specifically along Randolph Road, that large parcel. I understand this isn't a public hearing on Monmouth Commerce Center, but everybody, that's spoken tonight and all of our planning board members are well aware that it's somewhat of the, it's a pressing issue here in town, and it's, something that everybody is keenly aware of, that if we had, ordinances that required non-residential development to, have a certain percentage of green space, preserving existing wooded buffers, and so on and so forth, that would not only make certain projects more aesthetically pleasing, but it would preserve, existing, trees. It would also probably shrink the overall size of building coverage, and so on and so forth. So I think it's like something that kind of works in harmony with all of the other, recommendations within the document itself, if you're following what I'm saying. And then the really the last thing that I wanted to bring up, because I know it's getting late and you guys have covered a lot, is that with respect to the circulation element, it's the last time we had a circulation element was in the original master plan in 1994. That's quite some time ago at this point, 28 years approximately. This public hearing, was posted maybe a week or 10 days ago. I don't know specifically, but it was within the last few weeks. And these documents have been online for members of the public to review. I would just ask that the planning board consider maybe coming back for a second public hearing in person, so that members of the public are afforded additional time to review the circulation element and the land use element that are being proposed to be adopted tonight, and give the public additional time to review those documents. It's been decades and they've been online for a few weeks. I don't know if there's a rush to make to vote on them tonight, but I would just ask the planning board to consider coming back in person. I mean, I have spoken out about, how we're still having remote meetings for our land use boards. The planning board bylaw said that, the meetings can be held remotely if it's deemed, if there's a safety issue. I don't believe that there's a safety issue anymore with respects to the COVID-19 pandemic. The governor lifted the public health emergency on March 7th with Executive Order 292. Our council meetings are back in person. Our Board of Ed meetings are back in person. Masks are off in school. I frankly don't understand why our land use boards are still meeting in person, that they couldn't hold this meeting safely in person to allow members of the public to come in person. So
well, I would just say that the statute allows us to do it this way, and no member of the public is being deprived. Everyone who has wanted to participate has participated. So I would disagree that there's been some sort of slight to the public because the board has made this decision. It's permitted, and everyone has had an opportunity as they have had in every remote meeting to participate.
And I'm not suggesting that people were deprived of that right. I just think that
Mhm.
given where we are right now, with the fact that the public health emergency has been lifted and there are many public meetings that are being held in person safely, that our planning and zoning board meetings can be held safely in person. And that I would just ask that the board consider having a subsequent public hearing, tabling the vote tonight and having a subsequent public hearing to allow the public to continue to review the documents and digest the information in there, and then come back for an in-person meeting prior to voting on it. It's just my request. That's all. I have nothing to add tonight.
Thank you, Mr. Parisi.
All right, thank you, Mr. Tannenhouse. Good night, everybody.
Have a good day.
Good night. Eileen, I think that is the last member of the public.
Nope, we got another hand up.
Alex Getkin is also in the meeting.
I think he's a reporter.
Oh, sorry.
Is
Yeah,
it,
one more check.
is it Betty that we just let in? Okay, ma'am, do you swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give this board is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
Please state and spell your name for the record and give us your address.
Betty Velez Gimbel, VELEZ-GIMBEL, 97 Victory Road.
Okay, go ahead.
I just wanted to join quickly, just to reiterate what I just heard as far as giving the public additional time to review the documents. As Mr. Parisi before me stated, that this has been a long time coming, and that we deserve a little bit more time to take a look at this. And then also, in just a comment on the remote meetings, I do have neighbors that had difficulty getting online at the zoning board meetings. So that's also a consideration. So I appreciate your time and your consideration in this. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey,
very much. Have a
Ron,
good
it's Joe
night.
Cristiano. How long were the documents online for people to view?
You're muted, Ron.
At least 10 days. I don't know when they actually went up, but I know they were up for at least 10 days.
Thank you.
I have nobody in the public with their hand raised.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, if you'd like to close the public.
Okay, we'll close the public portion of the meeting.
So, Mr. Chairman, there's a specific request for an adjournment so that a professional can be hired. There were other more general requests for an adjournment for additional time to review documents. As I said, the MLUL doesn't require you to extend the time, nor does it prohibit you from extending the time. So it's up to the board as to what it would like to do, either carry to a date certain, or the board can deliberate and vote tonight.
Interesting question. Does anybody from the board have any comments about that subject? I mean,
Brian, if I may, here's what I would say. And I know Ron and Jen say this in different ways, but the master plan is a blueprint and a living document that by law is supposed to be reviewed X amount of years. And these are just recommendations. The master plan subcommittee spent over a year on these two circulations. And although a lot of the testimony I appreciated and some I disagreed with, this is what happens that, no offense to lawyers, they come on and they make these arguments and things get delayed. The master plan, again, can always be reviewed. It's a little vanilla, as Ron said, that it gives the governing body latitudes to make decisions that they want to make. And I personally don't see any reason why we should belabor this anymore.
right. And I happen to agree with you, Mr. Cuchero, just for my own understanding. Some of the concerns are going to be if there is an ordinance adopted or ordinance changes adopted by the council for some of these recommendations, it'll be at the council meetings that these things can be vetted
So
out.
some of the recommendations that were highly specific, that's exactly right. That the ordinance which implements the master plan would incorporate that level of specificity. This announces and adopts the general policy goals of the municipality. The specifics as to different areas, to implement that broad policy goal will be with the governing body, who can do all of those things that were discussed tonight. And also, it's the subject of a different public hearing, where every member of the public would have an opportunity to participate in that process.
And Ron, just to add, even if it was inconsistent with the master plan, there's still a process for the governing body to move forward on adopting an ordinance.
If it's inconsistent with the master plan, and that's what the board finds, there's special rules in how to adopt it. Most notably, the governing body has to adopt a resolution which goes through the planning rationale, as to why they would adopt an ordinance that is not substantially consistent with the master plan, because the statutory and common law tells you that it should be substantially consistent. So they can still do it. It's just there's an extra level of requirement to support it.
Right, that's the point I just wanted to make.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if nobody else has any questions, I'm for voting for a motion.
I second.
Okay, so just to be clear as to what the options are, you can accept Jen's draft in total, you can reject it in total, you can add things, you can delete things. So, that's the universe of options that the board has.
Well, I made my comments that I think should be added. I think Jen concurred that those were good ideas to look into. So Ms. Beam, would you agree that at least the items that I brought up should be included?
And I would submit, Ron, that there were minor clarifications that I would defer to you, but in my opinion, I would.
Well, they weren't inconsistent. It didn't change the manifest intent and purpose. Didn't create any new uses or different bulk standards than were already in. It was just a clarification and a better explanation of what was already in there. Would that be correct, Jen?
That's correct.
All right, so you wouldn't need a new notice or hearing for that, Mr. Chairman. So if you want to make a motion to accept the draft with the additions that you placed upon the record, that motion can be made.
Okay, then I'll ask for a motion.
I'll make that motion.
I'll second.
Second.
Thank you. Roll call, please.
Mr. Cristiano,
Yes.
Mr. Greenfield,
Is he frozen?
Brian Greenfield.
Yes.
There you go. Thank you. Mr. Nacastro,
Yes.
Mr. Seaman,
Yes.
Yes.
Mr. Stanville,
Yes.
Ms. Talente,
Yes.
and Chairman Tannenhouse.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Okay, with that, Mr. Chairman, we do have the couple ordinances we delayed until after the public hearing on the master plan. So, Eileen, what is the first ordinance?
The first ordinance is O-2211. It's an ordinance amending Article X or 10, Section 188-84.4, Moderate and Low-Income Housing 14, otherwise known as ML 14, of the revised general ordinances of the Township of Howell.
So this ordinance, Jen, if I'm correct, it doesn't designate any new areas. It's an area that was already designated and approved by the court in the settlement agreement. And what it does is change some of the definitions to allow the development that was approved by the court to proceed. And I believe it was unanimously introduced by the governing body.
Yes.
Okay. So with that said, Jen, having reviewed it, is it substantially consistent with the master plan?
Yes, I would submit, yes, it is substantially consistent with the master plan, specifically the housing element fair share plan.
Okay, so Mr. Chair, if there is a motion to find it substantially consistent or not substantially consistent, now would be the time.
Okay, thank you. I'll entertain a motion that the ordinance proposed is substantially consistent with the master plan.
So moved.
Do I have a second, please?
I'll second.
Thank you. Roll call, please.
Mr. Cristiano,
Yes.
Mr. Greenfield,
Yes.
Mr. Nacastro,
Yes.
Mr. Seaman,
Yes.
Mr. Spanville,
Yes.
Ms. Talente,
Yes.
and Chairman Tannenhouse.
Yes,
Motion carries.
thank
The
you.
second resolution or ordinance is O-2212, which also deals with moderate and low income housing for Zone 14.
And I think, Jen, this is the same intent of this ordinance to modify some definitions to permit the development that was included in the settlement agreement that was approved by the court, correct?
There were a couple of additional lots that were purchased that would improve the access. And so it's not only modifying the language, yes, but it's also including those additional lots so that the access can be both on West Farm and on Casino and not have to go through the established neighborhood. So I would submit that, yes, it's still substantially consistent.
Okay. All right, so Mr. Chair, if there's any questions or a motion.
Okay, any questions from the board? Okay, if not, I'll entertain a motion that the ordinance proposed is substantially consistent with the master plan.
I will make motion.
Thank you. Do I have-
Second.
Thank you. Roll call, please.
Mr. Cristiano,
Yes.
Mr. Greenfield,
Yes.
Mr. Nacastro,
Yes.
Mr. Seaman,
Yes.
Mr. Spanville,
Yes.
Ms. Talente,
Yes.
and Chairman Tannenhouse.
Yes.
Motion carries. Thank you.
Okay, I'd like to thank everybody for taking their time out of their Thursday for this special meeting and for staying on longer than the 10 o'clock deadline. Much appreciated. If
Thank
there's no further business, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Thank you. Everyone have a great night.
You too.
Thank you.
Have a good night.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.